Coming up, Will from Exploding Helicopters back on. We're going to be looking at a Craig Fairbrass double feature. First will be Villain, and then we'll be looking at Rise of the Foot Soldier Part 3. And then next week, I'm going to be starting the Kickboxer series. So I'll be looking at Kickboxer 1 and 2, sort of that solo franchise thing. Also, if you may have missed it, because I completely forgot to do social on this, last week I reposted episode 12 that I did with Jamie way back in 2014, where we looked at The Howling Part 2. So if you go into the archives, it's way at the very bottom, right? It's the very first entry in there, episode number 12. But yeah, you can check that one out as well if you want to kind of get a little blast from the past. Hoping to get those other 11 up at some point. So there's 2 right before that. So numbers 11 and 10. Those were 2 that John and Jamie did while I was getting married and then doing our honeymoon. So they did those episodes without me. There's only 2 DTV Connoisseur episodes that don't have me in them. I'm going to try to track those down. I think they're on an old computer. I went to see because I found the email that John sent me that had the links in them, but of course it was like a file transfer site that the link went bad a long time ago. So anyway, so we'll try to get those up. And then, of course, I have all the other ones before that on my computer. So I could potentially start uploading those from there. Maybe we'll skip those 2 and kind of keep going with the others. But anyway, so hopefully getting the old ones that were lost in that TalkShoe server meltdown, get that taken care of. So anyway, so next week, Kickboxer, we'll be doing Kickboxer 1 and 2. The week after that, hoping to have Ty from Come Up with Some. We're planning to record here. We're going to be looking at a couple of going back to kind of the Willis well, I guess you could call it. We'll be looking at the first in the 3 Detective Night movies, and then we're going to look at a Hector Echeverria film. So that ought to be interesting. We might go back into the old Kenner rant from Unrivaled, which was a classic on the site. So that's what we've got going on with the podcast. Now, I don't have another guest lined up as of this recording, so we'll kind of see what happens. Hopefully we'll get somebody in for the 22nd. That would be the next one that we'll need a guest. So fingers crossed. I'm going to start kind of putting feelers out there. So with the blog, looking this week to do American Siege, so another Willis one that Ty and I covered a while back on the podcast. Actually, it wasn't a bad one, so be interested to cover that. Then looking to potentially do Mercenary, Jesse V. Johnson film after that, and then High Heat, one that Will from Exploding Helicopter, when he was on the last time, we talked about Olga Kurylenko, we did that one. Also, my wife and I just subscribed to AMC Plus, and a film that is on AMC Plus that hasn't been available anywhere else is VFW. I know people have talked about VFW, definitely going to try to check that one out in the near future and get that one reviewed as soon as possible. So that might jump ahead one of these ones that I've got coming up. So we'll see what happens there. As always, of course, check us out on the site, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you get links to everything. Check out my novels, Chad in Accounting, Girl in a Gun, Holtman Arms. I've been trying to get through the read-through, this last read-through to get my next novel, Don's House in the Mountains, hopefully getting it self-published by end of August, but I have not had the energy to do the read-through. The last read-through, you'd think I can get myself over the goal line, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. But fingers crossed that hopefully we'll get that soon. So why don't we go from here? We'll have John Cross, Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures, play our theme song here, and then after that, Will from Exploding Helicopter and I are going to talk about some Craig Fairbrass. All right, and we are back, and I am joined here by a very special guest. We have Will from Exploding Helicopter. Welcome back, Will.
Oh, thanks for having me back on, Matt. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. I was, I'm thinking to myself, 'cause every time we have a guest on, I always say very special guest, and like you've been on plenty of times before, and it's like I wonder if like I should transition out of the very special guest, but then I always feel like the first person who doesn't get the first very special guest is it's going to be like, oh, so now I'm not a very special guest anymore. So I don't know. So
I've got a
could be a
very
tradition.
fragile ego, Matt. So you make sure that you give me a suitable introduction. Otherwise, I'm going to be very angry, or I'm going to be
Right,
very sad.
exactly. Right. Suddenly I'm emailing you to be on an episode and I don't hear, it's crickets on the other end, right? It's like, like, I wonder what happened there, And yeah, all goes back. That would be like, I guess, like a Curb Your Enthusiasm, like a sitcom episode here in the United States. Or yeah, it's just, yeah, you didn't give him a very special guest. And yeah, so.
That would be an entire episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Honestly, that's actually a great plot
Yes.
for one of their episodes.
Yeah, that could be their next season. Is that he has a podcast, and yeah, and that could be one of like someone like Richard Lewis, right? Just Jeff Garland's like, I heard it was you didn't give him a very special guest. You gave John Hamm a very special guest, but you didn't give Richard Lewis a very special guest.
Yeah, it's the perfect. Honestly, it would work so well for them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of it's kind of just that show. It's funny. Like I think I don't know if it's getting to the point where it's run its course. But because it's been on. I didn't realize it's been on since like 2000. I think so. So yeah. So it's very 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 interesting. Yeah, thinking about something like that. But yeah. And actually, I mean, we've got you on here. Last time you were on, we talked about Olga Karolinko. This time we have a really cool actor that we're going to be talking about here, Craig Fairbrass, someone whose career I'd been meaning to get into for a little bit. So when you mentioned this as a possibility that you wanted to talk about, I thought this was a great one.
Yeah, well, I was glad you were so enthusiastic behind it, because Craig Fairbrass is somebody who has been around on our TV screens in the UK for about 35 years. I mean, he's also been in some very big movies. Obviously, most famously, he had a great part in the film Cliffhanger, and he's kind of had, I guess, a sort of. Journeyman career. I guess for the most part, it'd be the simplest way I would describe it. But in the last few years, like Craig Fairbrass has, I think, really been coming into his own. And I mean, I like to. I just coined this phrase actually when I was thinking of my prep. The Fairbrassance, I think, is what we are witnessing at the moment. In basically the last sort of 6 or 7 years, the quality of films that he has been putting out is really sort of top notch, and he's kind of segued from basically being like a sort of bit part supporting actor into sort of transition. He's managed to kind of transition his career into making himself into a leading man. And some of the films that he's been putting out in recent years are really, really good. And if you're not sort of familiar with some of that work, hopefully after our conversation today, some of your listeners will be intrigued enough to go and check out some of these films.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things I think, and I don't know fully, what the American, moviegoers, sense of Craig Fairbrass is. I mean, of course, I remember him in Avengement, more recently, and he was fantastic there. But I think there almost is a sense because again, Americans aren't as exposed to films in the UK. And the other thing too is that it seems like a lot of, other than like Jason Statham and Gary Daniels and Vinnie Jones, it seems like most Brits, when they do movies in America, they don an American accent or affect an American accent. So I think that's another piece of it. I think a lot of the films that Craig Fairbrass does aren't as big here in the US. But one of the things I think that struck me as I was going into these two films and watching them is that I think there's a sense that he's just another kind of hard man like a Vinnie Jones, but he's got much more range and depth. I mean, he's a legitimate actor as opposed to Vinnie Jones as a former footballer that they, who's kind of adapted to being a hard man on screen.
Absolutely. And, Craig Fairbrass wanted to be an actor, from a young age. So when he was in his teens, he auditioned for and got selected for I think it's like the UK National Youth Theatre Company. So that was his kind of calling, sort of from a young age. And I would completely agree with you that he's not just somebody who has transitioned into these hardman roles from, say, a career in sports, or whether it's football or wrestling. He has always wanted to be an actor. And he is somebody who's looks like he could have been a wrestler. I mean, he's 6'3". I mean, he's a real wardrobe of a man.
Yeah, that's the one piece I think that stands out. I mean, it stood out in Avengement, and I think, obviously with Avengement, you needed somebody with a real presence to be able to play the part of Scott Adkins's older brother, like, because
Mm.
Scott Adkins's character was such a presence in that film. I don't think it would have worked if they just gotten a Vinnie Jones to play, or someone like a Vinnie Jones. I also don't think it would have worked with Nick Moran, right? Nick Moran is also an Avengement, but Nick Moran is great. I mean, I think he's a fantastic actor too. Who's another one who's kind of been, I don't want to say relegated to hardman parts, but he he gets a lot of them as well. And he's got more depth as an actor than just the hardman too. But he doesn't have. I mean, Fairbrass has a presence that just
Mm.
it when he walks onto a set or walks into a scene, he's there. I mean, another name I think of like that is Dolph Lundgren, who's just like he's big, is kind of larger than life, and but then again, like Dolph Lundgren's someone who's kind of studied the craft of acting and gotten better at it over time. Whereas, like you said, Fairbrass was trained as an actor, not like someone who came into acting from sports, or in Dolph's case, I guess from a Fulbright scholarship to MIT, got into acting. Like Fairbrass is someone who really does it and knows what he's doing. So he can lean into that presence in a way that really just kind of, I don't know, it just permeates an entire scene.
I completely agree, because I mean he's a man mountain of a guy, but we watch a lot of these sort of DTV films, and there's plenty of like big hulking actors that you come across in those movies. But Fairbrass he has that indefinable thing. He has presence. He can just be standing in a scene, not saying anything, listening to somebody else speak, but you get that sense of, okay, you're sucked into wanting to see how he is going to react. And not every actor has that that sort of ability to communicate something, even when they are not doing anything, even if they're just standing still and listening to somebody. And I would completely agree with what you were saying a little bit earlier about, he's got genuine range. I don't think either of us could argue, he's some sort of chameleon like actor in the like Philip Seymour Hoffman or something. But if the scene requires him, if the scene is dramatic and requires him to have some a range of like express some sort of like emotion or empathy with a character, he can absolutely do that. And that just brings I would say brings an extra dimension into the films that we're going to be talking about today, and certainly some of the other work that he's been putting out in recent years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think he's a name that I don't know in America exactly how it works in terms of like what's chosen to be a film here or not. I think one of the things I know with Avengement, when I watched Avengement and then I started seeing some of the reviews and people talking about it, there were people in America who were kind of like, I couldn't understand what they were saying, or I didn't understand what was being discussed, or any of that. And I didn't have that problem. But I could see if someone like maybe learning English as a second language, watching an Avengement, or the movies we're going to be talking about here, that maybe they wouldn't pick up on the slang necessarily. Whereas like I can kind of pick up on for the most from the context. I think American English and I was going to say the Queen's English, but I guess it's now the King's English, right? Yes, right. I think my professor in college, who's from I believe he's from Nottingham actually, he said that they're about like 90% cognates. So there's like 10% of the language that's different between the two forms of English. But anyway, I think there's a sense of like, oh, if the movie is too British, I guess, or I don't know if that's the idea, but that what Americans want when they want something that's too British is they want like the quaint seaside village, right, with the kind of the dotting
or period drama, something like, with Keira Knightley, eating cucumber sandwiches or something.
Right, yeah, right. Either the period drama, or they want the sort of the precocious detective who's solving a crime in a small town, and everybody gets a kick out of the fact that that the cars are driving on the right hand, that the drivers are on the right hand side of the car instead of the left hand, and stuff like that, and there's an idea that that's what Americans want, and I think watching these two movies, and I think Villain, the one we're going to talk about first, I think is a little bit more accessible to American audience, because I don't think I think Rise of the Foot Soldier, what we're going to be talking about, Rise of the Foot Soldier 3, I think we're going to be talking about that one. I think that one, when we get into that, is a little bit more like it uses London and the area and Essex and those areas as characters more. And I think that can be, whereas Villain definitely takes place in England. It has a setting that's important, but it's not using London as a character to the same extent. And I think you could almost place it anywhere. You could put Villain anywhere. Yes, it would have its own. There's some aspects of it that are uniquely British, but I think it's something that any American could watch and relate to.
I completely agree. I think the sense of place is far more important to the Rise of the Foot Soldier, the film we're going to be talking about, but also the entire series as well. I completely agree. Like Villain, it's less geographically specific. It's very clearly a British film, but it could be, change the accents. You could shove it up to Glasgow. You could, set it in Manchester, Liverpool. You could basically move it to any sort of major city in the UK and it would still work. Whereas, Rise of the Foot Soldier, it's completely, for lots of different reasons, it's very much got that Essex focus. But you mentioned something a little while back, which I found really sort of was something that I'd actually been thinking of, which was how well do these films like export out of the UK? And part of the appeal of these films to me is that they are British films, British stories, British actors, and I got no bone. I consume lots of American films. I enjoy lots of American crime films, but there's something about I think I enjoy seeing those same sort of stories being told in a British context. And I kind of wondered how well they export, and whether that's maybe, I don't know, maybe Fairbrass is kind of working in too small a pool, because a lot of the films that he's been making in these recent years, very, very British, and did make me wonder as how well they export.
It's a great question, because I do think there is a little bit of that kind of that thing where I don't know how to explain it for Americans when it comes to stuff from to anything from outside the the U.S., whether it's from England, from Canada, or wherever that we're consuming. I want to say that I think part of the problem is that in America you have sort of an Anglophile set, that people that just think England, UK are just so much better than America. They're more sophisticated, all these kinds of things. And I remember that same professor that I had from Nottingham. I was his teaching assistant for Anthropology 101, and he was talking about I maybe 102, whatever, either way. But he was talking about sort of just some differences in traditions, like how in America, because we don't have one like standard culture that has existed for thousands of years. Like in England, for example, you've got sort of essentially kind of whatever, something that evolved post Roman, and even before, I guess, the Romans were there, but it's evolved into this sort of unique identity. And so something like the flag, it has importance, but not the way it has importance in America, where it's like most Americans don't have anything in common with, like I have almost nothing in common with somebody in the Midwest of the United States, or in the South, or in California or whatever. The only thing that we would have in common as a flag, and maybe that we have relatives that were in the military together. And I guess McDonald's, right? I could go to a McDonald's anywhere in the United States and it would be the same place. But I remember we were talking about this, and one of the students came up to him after and was like, "Yeah, I just think Americans are just dumb and whatever, and the English are just much more sophisticated." And I was like, "Yeah, your soccer hooligans are much more sophisticated." My professor's like, "Get out of here, Matt. Go, get, that kind of thing." But I think that's the thing, is that Americans, the Americans who love England, right, who watch the BBC America and BritBox and those kinds of things, they don't want to know that there is an England where people talk the way Craig Fairbrass's characters talk in these movies, or the characters talk in these movies, that there's actual crime the same way there's crime in America. It's one thing for it to be in America, but England's this special, beautiful place that if they could just, get the money together and get a visa, they'd go and live there, So there's that one part of it. And then I think the other piece is, and I think this is something we'll talk about when we get into Villain some. I think in America, when it comes to these kinds of movies, they don't always have the depth that these two movies we're going to be talking about have, especially Villain, which we'll be talking about a bit, has a depth to it that American movies don't generally have. And I think that's another piece of the issue, is that for Americans to sell them on a villain, right? It's like the type of person who would go into it thinking, like, seeing the trailer and being like, "Oh yeah, I want to see Craig Fairbrass beat the crap out of a bunch of people," and then you get into it and realize that's not fully what it is. There's a little bit of that. There's some of it, but it's more of a character study. I think that's another piece of it. I think that and I'm not saying American audiences aren't sophisticated enough for that kind of thing. It's just for them to find it. Americans have to really find it, I think, is the problem, and not everybody wants to find it.
And I guess the other thing is that, I guess thinking of American audiences, in why, part of the appeal is for me, these films is because, I'm British and these films are set in Britain. They're British stories. We've got British actors. So, America has the kind of dominant entertainment, it has the sort of the dominant movie industry. So, if I want to see, and love those American films, but if I want to see British stories, then I have to watch, things like this. So, but if I'm an American, I can watch big budget, crime dramas. I can watch low budget American crime dramas. Why would I? Why would I? You don't need to go and see, unless you're a fan of Craig Fairbrass, you don't need to go and see these films, because you can see, your sort of, I don't know, the stories of your own country and your own people are being told anyway by the kind of dominant entertainment industry. So why you don't need these films in your life in a way in which us Britons do.
Right. Well, and another thing, actually, as we're talking about this, that has changed. I think first and foremost, Avengement, I think, kind of going back to that film, that would definitely change things a lot, because, Jesse V. Johnson, when he makes a movie, he doesn't want to compromise on the British aspect of it. He's a Brit himself. And I think one of the things he does when he works with Scott Adkins that I always appreciate is he keeps Scott Adkins as a Brit. And he just explains why he's a Brit in Los Angeles in the Debt Collector movies, or and it doesn't even explain it. It's just that he's a Brit and that's where he is. And it's like, and we're completely fine with it. We don't need Scott Adkins to have an American accent in every movie. But the one I just reviewed on the site, Eliminators, he plays an American living in England, and it was like, I wanted to see him interact with England, and I think it's where Jesse V. Johnson does such a great job. And even Dolph Lundgren, when he did Castle Falls, he's like, "Yeah, you're from Birmingham. That's it. You're from, the movie takes place in Alabama, but you're from the Birmingham in England. That's I'm good with that," and it worked. But like, I think there's this sense, like, like Gary Daniels is another one. Gary Daniels always plays a Brit in the movies he's in, but other than Skin Traffic and then I Am Vengeance with Ross Boyask, who's he's a Brit himself, so he's kind of making British centric action films himself. I never really got to see Gary Daniels interact with England. He was never a part of England in his movies. He was always in Thailand or in the United States, in Los Angeles or whatever. And I do think that's an important thing. I think seeing these characters, interact with the United Kingdom, or not these characters, these actors interact with the United Kingdom, I think it brings something special to those movies. And I do think that seeing more of that, I think would be. I think right now England is, in terms of like direct to video action, England is doing a much better job than the United States. I think, it's
Wow, high praise, Matt. High
yes,
praise.
because if you look at it, right, you've got Jesse V. Johnson, right? You've got Ross Boyask with his I Am Vengeance films. He's got another film coming out I just saw called Codename Azrael. That's like got it's in pre-production. It's supposed to have Stu Bennett, but then also like Don the Dragon Wilson, Cynthia Rothrock, Matthias. He's all kinds of names in it. But you've got him, and then you've got like Shogun Films, right, where they did Nemesis and Renegades, where they're kind of making uniquely and sort of unapologetically British movies. And I think that's a complete difference from like Tom Jolliffe, who's been on the screenwriter who's been on the show or on the podcast before, and who works with Shogun Films. He talks about when he submits a script to the production company, they make it American. They just sort of mess with it, and he'll say like sometimes they'll even shoot it in England, and it doesn't look anything like any place in America. I mean here in Philadelphia where I live, there are some parts, like there's an area called Elfreth's Alley, if you ever look that up, that looks like it's got the old colonial look to it, that it looks like it could be something in you'd see in England. And Boston has a little bit of that too, but really for the most part, England looks like England and America looks like America. And so this idea that they've got to shoehorn it in to make it work, I don't know. I think for Americans, I think if they got more of it, they would appreciate it.
Well, I mean, if Americans started getting a taste for it, it would be all to the good for me as well, because it'd mean they'd start making some more of these films.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is a good transition for us to get into villain, because I think, again, Craig Fairbrass is somebody that I think I didn't really, I knew him a little bit, again, through Avengement and, Cliffhanger, like you said. And he was also in Far Cry, the Uwe Boll film that I did for the site at one point. So I think that was going to explode the helicopters. I think you may have covered that. I think you covered it on your podcast.
I have, yeah, covered it on the pod.
That's right. Yeah. So that's right. Because I think I had no clue about the video game. And I think the guest that you had on explained what the video game was about. So, which was huge, like very insightful for me, because I had no idea about that part of it.
Well, we try to serve our audience well.
Yeah, that's interesting now that I think about it, because I was on for the Soldier Boys one, and we talked about a video game there as well.
So, that was, yes, quite. It did look to be, and certainly all evidence pointed to the fact that that was a very terrible computer game. But
exactly.
But a very bizarre. Like, why on earth would you create a video game to tie into the film Soldier Boys? But an answer to that question, I think, is now lost in history.
Exactly.
And the only the only computer game directed so far by Darren Aronofsky. So I mean, it's got some pedigree. Yeah. So random, so bizarre.
Yeah, so that whole for people out there listening, like we'll be doing plugs, of course, for your podcast later, but the Soldier Boys episode that I was on, it had elements to it that I wasn't expecting us to be discussing. When at first I was like, I'm gonna I wanted to give it another chance because I didn't review it that well, and I was like, this will be an interesting conversation for us. But then it was like, it was almost like peeling an onion, right? There was just so many more layers to it than we expected.
Absolutely, yeah. I think a great analogy for a surprising amount of stuff to talk about for what seemed to be a fairly sort of routine 90s action flick with Dudikoff.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Now with Villain, why don't I give a quick synopsis? I think when we get into Rise of the Foot Soldier, I meant to ask you this when we were off air, that I may need you to help me with that synopsis, but because it's based on true stories and everything. But Villain I can definitely do. Villain is it's got Craig Fairbrass as Eddie Franks, who is just getting out of prison. So we get to see him as he's in his last days in prison, and then he's leaving. He's got a brother, Sean, who is manning a pub that is supposed to be making the money, and he discovers that things aren't in the best place. And at the same time, too, Sean is into a couple of big drug dealers for some money. And so he's got to figure out sort of what he's going to do with that. And at the same time, his daughter just had a baby. He's trying to reconnect with her. That the relationship obviously would be estranged, with him being in prison. So as he's sort of trying to fix all of these things, he thinks he's got a handle on it. He thinks he's got a handle on how to handle these two drug dealers. He starts to ingratiate himself with the daughter. He starts to kind of build the pub back up, and then his criminal past kind of catches back up with him, or is sort of he has trouble getting away from it, and that's kind of how it goes. I should warn people because I'm not going to give away the ending right now, but there will be spoilers. So if you want to see Villain spoiler free, maybe turn off the pod now and go grab go watch it, because I don't think we can talk about it without the spoilers.
Yeah, it's a bit. I think it's a bit tough to kind of preserve. Yeah, to have a decent discussion of the film without and simultaneously preserve all the twists.
Yeah, exactly. So I won't tell you what happens at the end right now, but we will be discussing the end. So this gives you a sufficient time to turn off the podcast and go watch it, so you don't, if you're worried about spoilers. But yeah, Will, what did you think of Villain overall?
Overall, I really like this film. It was, it should be obvious because it was one of the ones that I pitched to you, wanting to do. And yeah, I think this is a really great, like, British crime film. I think the first thing to say out the gate is the story for this is incredibly generic, as you've just outlined. It's he's just out of prison. He kind of thinks he's going to be able to go straight, but he's sucked back in due to like old loyalties. And we've got the daughter that he's estranged from. He's trying to he's trying to make up for past sins with his relationship with her. And literally every element of this story is something that you have seen umpteen times before in the film. But I think what is so like commendable about Villain is the fact that if you have good actors and a good director and you trust them, you can still make a really compelling film out of ingredients that have been used put together so many times before in a very similar ways. So I just wish that a few more filmmakers would watch Villain and just hopefully draw a few conclusions that you don't need to sort of come up with like ridiculous plot twists or flashy visual gimmicks. If you if you have, as I say, if you have good actors, good director, and you get them to trust the material, then you can produce a really like compelling film, which I think Villain is. I think it is. I mean, it's a crime film, but it's very strong on drama. I think this film, there is violence in it, but that violence is very short. It's very sharp, and that violence also pushes the plot along. So I think on a lot of different scores, like for me, Villain is a real gem of a movie.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on this. And I think for me, the whole thing is anchored around Craig Fairbrass's performance. And I think where this thing differs from a lot of the kind of, like you talk about with sort of the generic plot and all of that. And I think the place where a movie like this would fail in most cases is that Craig Fairbrass leans into being an older character. And you don't always see that with actors of his age. I mean, he's not quite 60 yet. I think he'll be 60 next year. And I mean, there are scenes, like especially the scenes that he does with Azuka Hoyle, who plays his daughter with the baby there. He really leans into being a grandfather, and the way he looks down at the, like he's supposed to be looking at the baby, I think, in some of the scenes. But yeah, I had to like grab him. I mean, one of the things I feel bad for the rest of the actors in this is when I grab my images for the eventual review I just grabbed Craig Fairbrass once because I just love the way he was in these scenes. But I think the fact that he was mature enough to say, I'm going to play somebody who's older and lean into the fact that this man is older and he's got a whole past that he has to reckon with. I don't think this works if he's more like, no, I want to be younger. I want to be, this younger guy who goes in there and takes care of business. I don't think it would have worked if he hadn't leaned into it the way he did.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because I do think that part of his character, the fact that he is sort of older now, he is, somebody who's in his 50s, he's now a grandfather, does play, is sort of woven into quite a few of the plot lines in this film. So obviously this idea, he needs to be older, because he's got this daughter that he's trying to reconnect with. So there's no point in him trying to play 20 years younger than he really is. And it also plays into some of the other elements of the film as well. So the fact that how he's dealing with those with these kind of two other sort of criminals who are involved in the who are kind of like running the sort of the local drug business. There's a sort of they're contrasted with this sort of younger gang street this younger street gang, one of whom is his daughter's boyfriend, and there's a sort of you get this he's caught in a sort of clash of I guess sort of generations, because he's been away for 10 years, and these weeks on the street have no respect for this old geezer that is now suddenly sort of coming back out on the streets. And you see there's a sort of I guess an idea of a sort of an older form of criminality with like some like informal rules about like how you behave and how you act. And we see that sort of we see that play out in several scenes in the film. And it is an idea that is kind of woven into sort of several of the major plot lines here.
Yeah, and I think the plot twist that we get to, and so again, we've warned you about spoilers, so just know that they're coming here. But the main plot twist that we get is that Craig Fairbrass thinks he's got the whole thing figured out, because again, this is not his first rodeo, right? He's been around for a long time. He's seen all these things. And in fact, the scam that he thinks the two drug dealers are pulling is exactly the scam that his crime syndicate in Avengement was pulling, right? Where you have people delivering packages of drugs, money, whatever it is, and at some point you rip them off, right? You steal whatever it is from them, and suddenly they're in debt to you because they need to now pay off the drugs that they lost, right? Not knowing that you stole the drugs, And so Craig Fairbrass thinks he's figured it out, that his brother, who owes who lost the drugs for these two drug dealers, that they've stolen it from them, and he's figured out his way to get out of it. The blind spot, right, is that he can't foresee that his brother would be, we're talking about the glossary, my need for maybe a glossary of terms here, a grasser, right? Somebody who would rat out his family or his brother to the police. That's the one element he didn't see coming. He was warned about it by the two drug dealers. They warned him that his brother was a grasser or a rat. And he just didn't, he had, for someone who was so, what do I say, he was so wise to everything else that was happening on the street. That was his blind spot, was his brother, and it ended up being his downfall.
Yeah, and it's kind of I think it's sort of telegraphed a little bit, but I think the rest, there's so much that is good in this film that it doesn't really matter too much. And I think that the strength of the acting in this film really makes that work, even if you do see it coming. I think the strength of the acting really makes those scenes work, and you really see that, feel that sense of betrayal from Craig Fairbrass, that his brother has let him down, and he's put himself on the line for him to try and get him out of this situation. He's trusted him, believed him. He's not oblivious to the fact that this, he's brought all of this on himself. He's really let him down because he's been away for 10 years. Should have, there was no call to get involved in these get into this situation. It's all down to his poor judgment. But and so you really feel that sense of betrayal from him. And I think Craig Fairbrass is great, but also I think George Russo as his brother Sean is really good as well. I think you really get that sort of sense of a character who is, I guess, fundamentally weak, and who, because of that weakness, will just make consistent sort of poor choices. And I think he gives a very he creates a very believable, very plausible character.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? Is that Fairbrass cuts such a imposing figure, and he's so like magnetic and all of that, and that there has to be that sense of the one brother who kind of, doesn't have it, right? He's kind of, I don't know, say fate or, the whatever, when his hand was dealt when he was born, it wasn't quite as kind to him as it was to Craig Fairbrass's character. And you could see too how he would have been in the shadow of his brother, right? That
Yeah.
Fairbrass, that would have been the thing there. And again, it's one of those things where because of that, right? Because he would have been in the shadow of his brother the whole time. Craig Fairbrass's character is also so used to that as well, that there wasn't an idea that his brother could have gone off and done anything on his own. That right, that there's no way that he could have been having a deal with the police as well, because why would he do anything without me telling him what to do, or and so there
I
was
guess,
that.
I guess that's the thing, because he would always have been around to sort of keep him on the straight and narrow. If he started like getting into a situation that was a bit of bother, you can imagine Craig Fairbrass would be there to to get it straightened out. But obviously he's been away for 10 years. He's been away in prison. He's not been there to keep an eye on him to sort of make sure that he doesn't make these catastrophically poor choices. And yeah, once he's left to his own devices, he's got the scope to make those bad decisions. And yeah, this is Craig Fairbrass now sort of reaping the whirlwind that has resulted from it.
Yeah, and one of the things I read on this is because you're talking about like sort of him reaping, sort of, kind of what he sowed, earlier in his life, is when he dies at the end of the movie, it comes out of nowhere that it's the boyfriend of his daughter, after he'd roughed up the boyfriend of it. So just kind of giving people some of the backstory, the boyfriend was abusive towards his daughter. He sees the daughter, sees that she had a split lip, and so he goes to sort of scare the boyfriend off, and I think he maces him or sprays him with, and then just kind of just completely embarrasses him in front of his friends and everything. And so we know that is a check that at some point is going to have to be cashed. It's like, so the whole Chekhov's gun kind of thing, right? Like you can't, I think, to be honest though, I do think from an American standpoint, I do think this is one of those areas where maybe this kind of movie would differ from a standard American film, because I do think in an American film there would have been a sense of like, no, he beat up the guy that was, harassing his daughter, and that's it. Now he's scared him off. I mean, though when you think of the first Godfather, right? Santino does that, right? He goes, he kind of protects his sister who's getting beat up by her husband, and then he kind of comes back, right, and sells him out, ends up getting him killed. So there is a little bit of that there, but I think that's a piece. I read some of the reviews on IMDb, and somebody didn't like the ending. I think because it almost I think from an American standpoint, that would feel anticlimactic to have this kid who's just kind of a I don't know what the right term is, but he's like a punk, who just he's the one who takes down Craig Fairbrass. That character being larger than life, it doesn't seem like that should be it. But I think kind of playing off to the sort of the tragic element and the hubris element, it actually fit for me that was how it wrapped up.
Yeah, I think for me this was the right ending. It was the right choice, and I think that the tone of this film does feel sort of like I guess there is a sort of autumnal air to this tale. It does feel like a chapter is closing rather than like a new story is beginning. So I think that for me the ending here is correct. I don't really know how it would be more satisfying if Craig Fairbrass does get away, does get out of the country as he's sort of endeavoring to do. I don't know how that would improve it. I did feel bad for his mate Mike, who is collateral damage in that scene. That was the one bit of the ending that I felt a bit bad. Like I didn't think Mike deserved to die as well.
No, but I felt there was a little bit of inevitability there with that too, with the fact that he has this beautiful life, which I think he was living in Essex, I believe, right? Mike,
Yes,
with his wife. So Essex is going to play a part in the next film, but yeah, so there was a sense that he had this restlessness, and he needed to do something, and it was almost like, yeah, I mean. I agree. It would have been nice if maybe he ducked and avoided the spray of gunfire. But it's funny. I remember way back when I first started my site. there was a movie. I can't remember what the movie was, but there's a movie where everybody kind of dies at the end, and somebody was calling the movie Shakespearean, and I was like, what
Mm.
about this was Shakespearean? And they're like, well, because everybody dies at the end, and I realized that that's kind of an American sort of take on Shakespeare, is that if everybody dies at the end, then it's Shakespearean, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I
Well, I
do
think
feel
just to dive in on this, I think though it follows in a there's maybe it's something to do with I guess that idea of a sort of happy ending is something more downbeat endings I think are a bit sort of anathema to American movie executives, whereas there's perhaps something about uh, typically I think British, European, whatever, they're a bit more accepting of these sort of downbeat endings, and certainly you could see the downbeat ending. I mean, that is something that crops up again and again in British crime films. So like Get Carter, the ending of that film. Because we're doing a lot of spoilers on here for a lot of different films, but that film ends up with Michael Caine getting shot. The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins, that ends up with Bob Hoskins basically falling into the hands of the sort of the true villains in that film, and you don't see him get killed, but you know that yeah, Bob Hoskins is not going to be much longer for this earth at the end of that film. So it's something that yeah, I don't know, something that crops up quite a lot in kind of I think British crime films, as long as they're not directed by Guy Ritchie.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, because I think the tradition does shift because you have like the tradition, of course, of like Greek tragedies, right? And then with Shakespeare with the tragedies, you see that as well, right? The comedies always end up as some kind of goofy ending, where maybe Lord Falstaff, or whoever, kind of or what Taming the Shrews ending, but the tragedies, right? It usually ends up with that main character dying in some way. And I do think there was a sense of that. I actually looked it up because I was like, was this based off a play that I hadn't read before, maybe, or something like that? That because of the kind of the sense of it where this person sort of has been gone for a while and comes back to sort of claim what was once theirs, is something that a lot of times you see in you've seen some of Shakespeare's work, and even the way he dies, and even the dismemberment, right? Because Titus
Yeah.
Andronicus, right? They dismember people alive in that one. So the fact that when Craig Fairbrass kills the two drug dealers and dismembers them after the fact, that's actually a little bit tamer than what Shakespeare would have done with that. But in America's tradition, right? Mark Twain, in sort of his sort of answer to the Greek tragedy and Shakespeare's tragedies, is to have Tom Sawyer, right? And the big thing with Tom Sawyer is that he doesn't die at the end, right? But everybody thinks he's dead, and he attends his own funeral, right? And there's
Mm.
nothing more American than attending your own funeral, right? Because when you go to your own funeral, everybody talks about how great you are, and you get to sort of revel in that. It's like kind of the most Tom Sawyer's thing. And from an American literary tradition, I don't think maybe Mark Twain really understood maybe the pebble that he dropped in the water and the ripple effect that would have on our movies, right? But we generally don't like that kind of tragedy thing. We like a Tom Sawyer who kind of comes out in the end.
Is that right though, Matt? Because as we're talking, my mind started whirring away, and I started thinking, well, like think of those classic gangster films. So say
Yes.
something like Scarface
Yeah.
ends with him dying. Like I'm thinking of a lot of Jimmy Cagney movies here.
Yeah.
Roaring Twenties again ends with him dying. Angels with Dirty Faces again. Jimmy Cagney
Yeah.
ends with him dying. Jimmy Cagney again in White Heat ends with him
Right.
ends with him
Yes.
dying.
Right. Right. Also,
But I
Little
guess that had more
Caesar,
to do with the Hays
with
Code
yeah. Right. Yeah.
than sort of other stuff.
Right. Well, because Edward G. Robertson too, in Little Caesar, right. So, and I think you're right, because with the Hays Code, right? Maybe that was part of it, right? So you can't. Yeah. I guess film noir too, right? Film noir,
Yep.
like I think of Postman Always Rings Twice, which is based on a book, but it sort of ends, with Frank. I know we're really, really getting into the spoilers here, right? Fred McMurray
There
there,
is going to be a movie left that we haven't ruined.
I know exactly. Yes.
Let's do them all.
Yeah, but I think part of that is too
Yeah,
actually when
Bruce
you
Willis is actually a ghost. Let's do that one as well.
right, exactly, right, exactly. One thing you could say in America too is that sort of that tradition of reading the classics and then reading Shakespeare as well. I can give my own experience reading Shakespeare in high school. We had a long-term sub because our English teacher was sick freshman year, first year of high school. And so the substitute really didn't know what he was doing, and we were watching Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and we essentially just told him day after day that we weren't we were essentially at the part right before I can't remember the actress's name, but when she's nude, she's topless, and we just essentially would have him start the movie at that point. For weeks, we played so that was sort of our understanding of Shakespeare, right? And I think we read Hamlet like later on, but wasn't until, for me, it was after the fact that I kind of came to Shakespeare myself. But I do wonder, in the 60s or in the 30s, even more so, you even just a basic, public school education would have had a kind of a greater sense of the classics. And I think anybody writing in particular, a writer at that time would have really been steeped in that, right? He would have felt like he needed to write in that vein. He wouldn't have been like trying to take bite on Mark Twain. Whereas maybe like later on down the road, maybe that changed. It's a fascinating thing to look at, I think, because that is part of it in America now, that it's like nobody dies in anything, right? The comic book movies, right? And comic books, even growing up, nobody ever died. Soap operas, and I don't know.
Fast and Furious films, they don't die.
Right, of course, yeah. In fact, yeah. I mean, yeah, I was, yeah, and I mean, I don't know, like in British soap operas, but it seems like in American soap operas, nobody dies either. They
Just
come
wander
back
out the shower again, don't they? Like Bobby
Right.
Ewing.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Exactly. So yeah, it's interesting because that was one of the things that I read about this, and I do think that's Avengement. I think Scott Adkins, right? I think we did they kind of leave it open maybe with him that he dies or doesn't die.
I can't remember the ending of that film. So you have the advantage on me.
Yeah,
I remember liking it a lot, but I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember how it ended.
Yeah, I want to say that he was bleeding to death, and I think it was a sense of like he may or may not have survived, because his whole goal, right, was to take all of his brother's money and give it back to the people that had been ripped off by him. And so he did at least achieve that goal. But yeah, I do think that and I guess you're right. Like me sort of reducing it to Mark Twain, right? I think like you said, it kind of skips that huge period of time in the 30s and 40s, where you had so many things where you did have that kind of ending. But I think too, I wonder too, like there's an anti-hero thing too that's grown in America. I think you think of the WWF wrestling. Where I think we were talking about wrestling last week. I think weren't we, with one of the Olga Kurylenko films. That's right. The last time you were on.
The Dallas guy. I can't remember his name.
Diamond Dallas Page. That's right.
That's
yes.
it.
But one of the things that happens with wrestling in the late 90s, early 2000s is Stone Cold Steve Austin becomes somebody that's celebrated. And I remember watching a show where Bret the Hitman Hart, who was a kind of a popular wrestler at that time, he said it felt like a definite sea change for him because Stone Cold Steve Austin was supposed to be a heel. He was supposed to be a bad guy. And the fact that people were cheering for him, despite the fact that he wasn't really good, that he'd become this anti-hero thing. And I think that's maybe what is it. Going back to the Fast and Furious films, right? All the baddies end up turning into good guys in later, So there isn't a sense of like I think Nathan Shepka, who working with Tom Joliffe, was they're putting together a film called Baby in the Basket. He had commented on my Facebook page about how these Fast and Furious films don't feel like they have any stakes, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about here. This movie Villain has stakes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that gives the film a weight that it wouldn't have if Craig Fairbrass, if he susses out that his brother was a grasser, because I think that's part of what would have had to happen. I think you were right. Like, there's no way he could have gotten out of the situation he was in. I think the cops were on him. Maybe he could have escaped to leave the country, but it would have been tough. And he would have been, it would have been hard for him to kind of exist while he was a wanted person. I think it would have been the story would have been that he susses out what happened. I mean, that would have been a Fast and Furious thing, right? If this was Dominic Toretto, he susses out that he's got that there's a rat in the midst, right? Whoever that character is, right? That it was new to the cast. It turns out he's working for the bad guy or something.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is that Americans are used to that kind of movie.
Yeah, I think I really agree with you that this film has stakes, but what it does is it creates stakes through, actually having like characters that you're invested in. I think often filmmakers think, there needs to be, we need to have stakes in this film, so you have some sort of fantastical plot where the entire fate of the world is in jeopardy, but don't actually. That doesn't necessarily, the stakes don't need to be it's not the size of the stakes, it's how much you care about what is at stake here. And actually, by having like three-dimensional characters that you've got some sort of investment in, then you know it doesn't, if you look at the stakes in this movie, they're pretty small. It's like, well, will he reconnect with his daughter or not? Well, that you actually end up caring about that, because you end up caring about Craig Fairbrass. You feel the fact that he is, regrets the, things that have gone on earlier in his life, which meant that he, is estranged from his daughter, and he's trying to put that right now. And so, yeah, the stakes don't necessarily need to be big, but as long as you feel that they matter to the characters and the characters make them matter to you.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things too, I think with Fairbrass, one of the big stakes, right? Is he's gotten out of prison, and that idea of, okay, I'm going to make good, right? I'm going to clean up the pub, have it making money again, and it's going really well. And suddenly he gets this news that his brother is into these two drug dealers for £80,000, and now it's a stressful thing that he's got to figure out how to get around. And initially, right, he has this idea that he's going to rob this pawn shop that a friend in the past had owned, that he pawned his watch off to try to get some money to sort of, at least make a payment on what his brother owed. And he thinks he's going to rob that place, and decides instead, which we don't know, right, until it actually happens, he decides instead that no, he's going to kill the two drug dealers, dismember them, and dispose of their bodies, right? And one of the interesting things is that in that scene, I don't remember if it was the scene when he goes to bring the money, the first payment to the drug dealers, and they don't accept it, and they end up beating him up. I can't remember if it was that scene or the one before that, when they first tell him about his brother owing the money, where they say, hey, word on the street is your brother's a grasser. And he's just like, no, there's no way my brother could, and so he thinks he's got it all figured out, and he makes this choice to say, okay, instead of robbing this pawn shop, I'm going to kill these two guys that we owe the money to, and that's going to alleviate the debt that way. And he feels like, okay, I just do this once and it's done, and we're over with. And unfortunately, right, it ends up being the wrong decision, because he doesn't know what's happening with his brother. But I think, like you said, the stakes are small, right? I mean, £80,000, it's a hefty sum of money, and it's enough to create enough tension and stress for them to do that. But like you said, it's not like he needs to save the day in London, right? That, like, he's got to rescue somebody, or that, I mean, there's no damsel in distress that he needs to rescue. The daughter doesn't ever get kidnapped or anything like that. There's nothing like that he needs to do.
Yeah, because I mean, we see the flat where Craig Fairbrass is like living with his brother, and it's a pretty shabby sort of rundown flat. So that if he loses this pub, like what's really going to be left for him, for his brother. They're gonna they won't have the business anymore. They're going to be in this like crummy flat. How they're going to be paying the rent on it? He's been a criminal all his life. Without the pub, he's probably going to have to go back into what does his future hold if he doesn't go back to crime. So you kind of, yeah, as you say, it's not a big sum of money, but you kind of the world in which the film creates for these characters, you can feel the walls closing in on Craig Fairbrass at that moment, and you can understand what then sort of pushes him into making that choice. If he rips off this jeweler, is he really going to make 80 grand from ripping off that kind of pawnbrokers? Probably not. So that's that kind of, as I say, the walls closing in, and you feel the kind of the pressure, like, okay, I'm going to have to do this one thing, and maybe can get out from under that way.
Yeah, and I think the thing is I think he, probably too, like you talk about with the pub, like, giving up the pub, is there one source of income? And like you said, he'd have trouble finding a job after the fact if that was the case. And I wonder too if he thought the pub wouldn't be sufficient either. That, like, because again, he thinks these two drug dealers have pulled a con on his brother, right? That again, again, this idea that his brother can't take care of himself, right? That his brother isn't smart enough to be onto these things, and so his brother would be just the kind of mark that would let these two guys set him up for to be in the hold of them for 80,000. So he thinks he's got it all figured out, and I think to that point, he probably also there might have been a part of him that also thought too that the pub wouldn't have been enough, that they would have kept coming for more money or something like that. And maybe, again, that might have been his thought. I mean, I think these two guys would have been okay with him taking the pub, with them just taking the pub, and they would have left it alone from there, because we find out after the fact that they were the ones telling the truth about the whole thing, and that it's the brother that was lying, which I think just adds to another level. The other thing too that was interesting about this is we see one of the drug dealers at his home with his wife and kids. And I thought that was an interesting piece to this, that we just get a little bit of a sense that he is a family man who is, doing his crime, living a life of crime, but, also that, which was an interesting piece there that they didn't have to do. He could have been at another pub or something when he gets the phone call to meet with Craig Fairbrass.
Yeah, that was an interesting choice. And I think to what you were saying, I think it was just to sort of round him out as a bit of as a character a little bit more, to show us that he does have another side, because every other scene that we see him in, he is he's basically he's basically exuding menace in one form or another, like threatening either Craig Fairbrass or his brother over money that is owed. So I think that just gives him, just kind of rounded him out as a character. So it was an interesting choice, but I think a very astute one, to just give that character an extra dimension.
Yeah, and I think even those little touches like that, but I think, again, with the depth that we talked about with this film, I think it's another area where this could potentially run into problems with America, is that, how do you package this to America, as a film? And I think the problem is that they would try to package it as like, this is another, Guy Ritchie Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels kind of thing, when it isn't. This is this. I mean, yes, there's a scene where he beats up this guy who works for the two drug dealers. He's kind of like a low end foot soldier kind of person. The brother thinks that he's a bigger deal than he is, but Craig Fairbrass smashes him and his buddy with a hammer, and then bites his ear and spits it out, and it's like very really like kind of an atavistic kind of scene there, but that's kind of like the only real piece that you have that links it to that kind of Guy Ritchie, or the kind of movie that we're going to be talking about, in a bit. I mean, yes, the murder and dismemberment of the two bad guys is a very like visceral kind of thing, but it's also the kind of thing that you'd see in like a Coen brothers crime movie too. Like it was the kind of thing that you'd see in any kind of murder mystery kind of film as well. So that wasn't quite the same as that fight scene, or that scene where he beats those two guys up.
Yeah, no, I mean it's true, because there's no huge shootouts in this film. There are no car chases. I imagine if you were marketing, what you would do is you'd probably create a very. I probably should watch the trailer for this, actually. It'd be interesting to see what it looks like. But I would imagine, if I was a sort of cynical sort of hack working for a kind of company that had purchased the distribution rights to this film in America, I'd be cutting every moment of violence together, like Craig Fairbrass storming into that pawnbroker's, the bit where he's beating up those two sort of low-level villains in the pub. I'd be clipping all of those bits together to make it look like it's to make it look like it's avengement, even though it's actually much more of a drama than it is an action film.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? And I think that's I mean, it's like kind of the problem, I guess, with so many movies, right? Is that like the trailer is nothing like what the actual movie is, and so or sometimes the tin, right? The tin gives you a sense of the movie is one way, and because even that, like it's like they show him kind of in a suit walking with I think it's like the London skyline behind him. And again, the him being in a suit is kind of more like that's what he went to prison in, right? It was the suit, and he's now wearing a suit again on his way out.
It makes him look like he owns London, doesn't it? It makes him look like a super criminal, when actually he's just a real ordinary run-of-the-mill criminal who doesn't want to run London anymore, just wants to run a pub.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the one on IMDb, and it's like just him with a gun with all this like fire and explosions behind him, like this like wake of destruction. And yeah, that's not what this. And then in the end, then there's the other one where it's him with like kind of like a the letter V is behind him, and then the London skyline over the Thames. I think is that the river that would be showing
Yes.
there. Yeah. It's kind of with him sort of again like in this sort of like he's ready to give it to somebody, kind of pose.
Yeah, it's I mean, you understand why they do it, but it doesn't. You just think it's just going to create problems with people thinking they're getting one thing and ending up with another. So yeah, I wish yeah, I wish there was a better solution to this problem with, we need to get people to watch a film, but must be a better solution than just blatantly mis-selling films.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting thing because I mean, again, this is more of a tragedy in a sense, or a drama in that sense, that but it has the violence in it, which again, I think that is kind of where I kind of lean on Shakespeare, because his tragedies tend to have a lot of violence in them as well. And it is usually very visceral the way that it is in this here. But it is ultimately a tragedy, right? That this character ultimately, can't escape his past and the things that he's
Mm.
done in his past, and he can't escape who he is, right? He's ultimately going to be this person as much as he tries to. And it's really sad. It's a sad ending, and I guess that's the other piece of it too, that not everybody likes to watch a movie that has a sad ending. But I think for me, kind of what you were talking about, that when you watch something with it's with a great, like you said, it's kind of a generic story, but when you've got actors all playing the parts that they played to the level that they played them in, it can be really compelling and entertaining, even if it has a sad ending.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've mentioned a couple of the cast here, but I think the casting throughout this film is really really good. It just adds to the kind of quality of the film. So we have Robert Glenister as the kind of like the main villain of the piece. I don't know how familiar he is to you, but he's somebody who's worked a lot in British television. I mean, he's been in some films as well. In had some, but he's mostly a sort of a British TV actor, and he's very good in this film. Very just conveys the sort of menace. And I mean, there's a good speech in here where kind of Craig Fairbrass sort of says, look, everyone hates you. They can't wait when you come into a room. They can't wait for you to leave because you're just a bully. And that was perfectly encapsulates that character, because he's just got, Robert Glenister conveys that sort of arrogance of being the biggest dog in the yard, and having been that for years and years and years, and just sort of slowly curdling his personality. And he's this sidekick, who's sort of like his right hand man, who's played by Tommy May. He's just right for that role as well. You kind of get that sense that he loves working for Robert Glenister, because it gives him carte blanche to like bully people like Craig Fairbrass, like the guy like George Russo, who's playing his brother. And yeah, the casting, even for sort of the smaller parts like that, I just think is really spot on, and just adds to the kind of the sort of compelling film that we get here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like you said with Glenister, when we get that, we get that scene of Fairbrass saying you're the bullies and nobody likes you and all that stuff, that's juxtaposed, right, with him being with his family, and he's like, joking around with his daughters, and can you get the phone for me and all that stuff, and they're having dinner and all of that. And so, obviously his family doesn't see him as a bully. Well, we don't know for sure, but at least the way it seems in that scene, right, that he doesn't think that. But you're right that Glenister kind of comes in like, yeah, and like you said, I wasn't familiar with him. I think recognized him, but I didn't really know him too well. But yeah, it's like he plays that part exactly the way you want it to. As like you said, like there's a sort of hard nosed like crime boss who is just ruthless and ready to take money from anybody. Though it's interesting again with that twist in it that he's the one who's telling the truth the whole
Mm.
time, and also too, right, that he's, I don't want to say he's magnanimous in giving George an extra chance to pay the money, but right, they take him out in the woods in the beginning of the film, and we think he's going to get executed, and they let him live. That's when we find out that he's the brother. But yeah, there's almost a sense of like, you know, they're doing this because they have to, right? Like we can't let you get away with losing
Yeah.
80,000 quid worth of product. We've got to do something about this, and we're going to do something about it. And you giving us $20,000 and paying us back is not going to do it. Like that's not how we run the city here. That's not how right, again, as bullies, this is not how bullies work.
Well, I
That
think it feeds into that idea of tragedy, isn't it? The inevitability of how the story progresses, because Robert Glenister and his crew, they've got to get that money back, because otherwise they lose face, they lose respect, and other people are going to take liberties. Craig Fairbrass, well, he's going to try. George Russo's his brother. Of course he's going to try and help him out of this hole. Like that's what he does. And the characters make the choices that they have to make, and they inevitably build towards the ending that we get here. So I think it sort of feeds into the sort of the classical tragedy, the classic sort of tragedy elements that are a part of this story.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I didn't even think of that because yeah, Robert Glenister could have just said like, "Here, oh, thank you, I'll take the 20,000, and yeah, we'll make that a payment, and just give me the other 60,000 over the next few weeks, and we'll be all set." Right? He could have done that, and then we wouldn't have had a movie at the end, and it would all been everybody, right? Everybody's happily ever after, and it's all set there. But because he couldn't do that, right? Because he, and again, because Tommy May's character has to be the tough guy who stabs Craig Fairbrass, which I think adds to his wants to get revenge on them, and you kind of see that like you said in that speech where he's calling them bullies and saying everybody hates you, and they just can't wait for you to leave the room. He's kind of going on this mindset that he feels like they ripped his brother off,
Yeah.
and so it's like, so not only have they ripped his brother off, but now they stabbed him, and it's like no, almost like he needs to save face as well in a way, but also like he doesn't feel guilty about what he's about to do either, because he feels like they deserve it.
Well, there's one element of that scene which, having watched this film a few times, which I don't quite get, and I'll run it past you, Matt, see if you've got a take on it. Which is, by that point, we know Craig Fairbrass is planning to kill like those two guys. So why does he go through that whole sort of it's obviously a charade then, where he's presenting them here are the deeds, here are the keys to the pub. Why bother delivering that speech? Now, I mean, from a dramatic from a if you ignore the sort of the cold logic of it, like in terms of like a cinematically dramatic scene, it works perfectly. But I can't think of a reason for that to play out that way within the strict logic of the story. I don't know if you've got a take on that.
No, well, because initially I thought he didn't plan to kill them, right? And I thought that he kind of gets worked up, and he can't help himself, and he gets into a fight with them, and that leads to him killing them, and right, it wasn't. But then when you realize like no, he had planned this out, like he had this whole thing set up. I think that maybe if I'm just sort of guessing here, that by giving them the deed and making it sound like he was capitulating, that it kind of caused them to.
Relaxes them.
Right, exactly. They drop their guard a bit because they think they've come out ahead, that they're winning, they're getting everything that they want, and then suddenly he turns the tables by getting. But yeah, I don't know, because there is a possibility that maybe from a writing standpoint that maybe it got away from them, that like because there is almost a sense in that scene when if I think back to it again, the sense that I got from that scene until they start dismembering the bodies, and he's got the painter suits and all that stuff on. I had a sense that he just sort of lost his temper, and it led to that whole thing. But no, actually, he had the gun and everything ready, and so I wonder if I feel like if you asked the writers, they would tell you that was what their plan was, that him giving them the deed was to get them off their guard. But I do kind of wonder if maybe they wrote themselves in a corner there, where he, they initially wanted it to be that he lost his temper, and then they had to kind of work with it.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be, it could, yeah, or it might be something that, because if you think about it's the editing that sets up the idea that he deliberately sets out to kill them, because you could re-edit the film, and you could make it appear, have all the same footage, but then make it seem as if it was a spontaneous decision to kill them, because you have what gives the game away are those that brief scene of like Craig Fairbrass digging in the wood in the middle of the night, and where he goes to that hardware shop and he buys the painter's suits that they don when they're cutting up the body. If you if you then have if you have Craig Fairbrass, those two gangsters come into the pub, he kills them. Then you have a scene where Craig Fairbrass goes to the hardware shop, buys the painter suit. Then you cut back to them cutting up the bodies, and then you go to the scene where all of that scene where they're digging the hole. Well, that doesn't necessarily that footage of him digging the hole, that could have just been something they did on that night when they're disposing the bodies. It doesn't have to have happened. There's nothing to indicate that in the footage we see that it happened on a different night. So it could have been, as you say, maybe they wrote themselves into a corner, or maybe they shot it that way and just thought, you know what, let's re-edit the film and suggest that this was something that he deliberately decided to do. I don't know. It would be something, if I ever bump into the director down the pub, I'll have to remember to ask him.
Yeah, because you make a great point, because I had the sense that he was initially buying the painter's suits for the robbery, which I don't know how much you would need it for a robbery, to go in. I mean, I'm sure you would definitely look at a source if you got out of a van in a painter's suit, with a mask on, and like everybody would know what you were up to, I think, and you'd have to be moving quickly. That was my initial thought, was that that's what they were doing, was that they were going to, sort of use the suits as a way so that there would be no trace of him when he commits the robberies. And then when he decides to not commit the robbery, but then I was like, but do you really need a painter suit for that? I mean, I don't know how much like the tread on your sneakers would, be left behind when you're, and of course, in his case, actually, it wouldn't matter, because he, if that even is a forensic thing, which I don't know.
Yeah.
He was already established as having visited before. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So not relevant. Yeah. So yeah, it is a little bit of it's the one sort of loophole in the film, but it's in no way does it spoil my enjoyment of the film.
No, I agree. I agree for sure. Because I think it's the character study that, with Fairbrass, with what he's playing in this role, and again, you're getting that scene where he is killing them and dismembering and all of that is juxtaposed with the scene where he's reconciling with the daughter, and he's just being so like grandfatherly, right? And he's leaning into it. And I mean, when I had to get a screen of the look on his face, because it was just so much of a grandfather, that he would pull that as an actor, that again, like I don't know how many actors. I mean, Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme now are starting to play older characters, and they're starting to feel more comfortable with it. I know Mark Dacascos in One Night in Bangkok, not the Murray Head song, but the movie that he did with Chaos. He played someone who was 10 years older than him. So he was born in 65, I think, and the character he played was born in 55. So he's playing somebody even older, and he kind of leaned into that. But you don't see it a lot with these actors, right? More often than not, it's Steven Seagal or whoever trying to play somebody 10 years younger. Even like those guys. I mean, Jason Statham in the Fast and Furious films. It's like him and his sister in the Hobbs and Shaw movie are like 20 years apart, and they're somehow they're making it seem like they both grew up in the 80s together. It's like so for him to do that, the movie wouldn't have worked if he hadn't done that. But he does it so well that when you get to this stuff where he's kind of desperate and he's sort of doing all of these things, it's like you're reconciling, you're sort of trying to kind of reconcile this person with the one we just saw holding the baby and saying, oh, here's granddad and all that stuff.
Yeah, but such is the quality of Fairbrass's acting that he makes all of those. He makes all of those things work. They don't feel like contradictory. They somehow they actually, what they do is they create a three-dimensional character. It doesn't, I think, we see in the hands of lesser actors, those things you start to become problematic. And when the director is not as good as Philip Barantini is here, that those start becoming like, wow, he wouldn't do, this guy wouldn't do that, or he wouldn't behave that way. Whereas here, they all feel like facets of one three-dimensional character, which this film manages to create.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that's really where the strength is. I mean, like you said, the story is kind of one we've seen before, but the way he plays it and the way that the other characters around him play it, it's almost like I always kind of feel like he's sort of like the planet, or maybe the star around which the planets orbit, or everything kind of orbits around him.
Mm.
But he's such a strong presence that he has that gravity that everybody can orbit around him, and I think everybody else does a really great job of being those sort of satellites that orbit around him, so you get this really complete film.
Yeah, definitely. And I just mentioned the director there, Philip Barantini, and he's done another film since Villain. I don't know. It's a film that's on Netflix. I don't know if you've heard of it or seen it before. It's called Boiling Point. But it's a very it's one of these one take films. So it's one take shots, all about basically a guy who is a sort of chef who is running a restaurant, and I guess there's some similar elements. He's in a bit over his head. His business is not in the best of shape, and we see kind of like this drama sort of play out over there. And the kind of, as I say, the gimmick of the film is that it is shot in one sort of continuous take, but it is a very it's a really good watch, and I will be very what this guy does in the future, because I think what you see in Villain, what you see in Boiling Point is, this guy's got a really good sort of sense of like drama and how to construct a film, how to get performances out of actors. So yeah, it's definitely somebody I'll be sort of keeping an eye on in terms of what they do next.
Yeah, I just looked up Boiling Point. So here in the US, it looks like it's available on like the Roku channel, which means it's probably like all the free ones. Let's see here. Oh no, just the Roku channel. That's interesting. So it's not Netflix here in the US, but it's the Roku channel. But yeah, I see that it has Stephen Graham
Mm.
from Snatch. So kind of a face that people in America would recognize, but probably not used to him leading the film. So yeah, I agree. I think after seeing this movie, I definitely would want to see this and see how it is. But like you said, it's a one shot movie, so that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's I'm not really giving anything away here, but Chekhov's not allergy. That's the
Okay.
if you introduce a nut allergy in your first act, then
Right,
that's
you've
the
got.
play.
Yeah, it's funny, like it's a the whole that whole Chekhov's thing, right? Right, because
So many variations.
yes, because I know we always joke about with your exploding helicopter movies, Chekhov's helicopter, and that
Absolutely,
is
yeah.
one way, right, that we haven't had a helicopter explosion is the pilot, or is it a pilot for a helicopter? I think it's a helicopter
Yeah.
pilot. Has a nut allergy and can't get the EpiPen in time, and it sort of crashes and explodes.
That would be a great one. I'd love to see, yeah, lots of sort of fumbling in the back as somebody's trying to like get the first aid kit out.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, he needs the EpiPen. He needs like, and all of a sudden maybe it falls out. Right, they watch it kind of sort of
Yeah, because the helicopter's out of control because he's
right.
having a sort of nut allergy attack, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's rolling around the floor, and they keep trying to grab it, but they can't,
Yes.
and then it's all too late. Massive
Right.
explosion.
Yeah, that would be that would be yeah. One way we have, it's funny how many different ways. I know we're kind of on a tangent here, but I know just from my own experience being on your show, one of them was and Last of the Finest, right? It was helicopters, like the windscreen being covered in sewage and sort of
Yes,
spinning out of control that way. So, but you see, sporting equipment,
and
animals.
that's Chekhov's septic tank, isn't
That's
it? Because
right.
that is signaled earlier in the film for another reason, and then
Right.
it pays off later in another way. So I mean, yeah, Chekhov's septic tank. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, that the Chekhov's piece to it, because whenever you watch a movie that doesn't pay off the way it's supposed to, right? Where you're like, you introduce something, it's like we were talking about with the traditions of film, whether it's tragedies or in America where they don't want the hero to die at the end or whatever it is. The Chekhov's thing, it's like if you introduce something and you don't pay it off later, everybody notices it, and everybody, it's funny. One of my second novel that I wrote, A Girl and a Gun, the main character has a friend who plays American football professionally, and he's getting a steroid test, and I wanted to have the steroid test to show that like the main character, that this character wants to retire from being an American football player, and part of it is just the invasiveness of having to do these steroid tests all the time. But I realized after the fact that there was a Chekhov's steroid test element to it, that like you can't have a character taking a steroid test that doesn't fail the test later. And so I wanted it to be this device to be like, this poor guy, this not poor guy, but this athlete who's just tired of having to take these urine tests whenever they come, because they just show up whenever. And the main character kind of gets a sense of how invasive it is, and that's sort of what the whole scene is supposed to do. But no, I was, again, check out steroid tests. Like any kind of athlete who takes a steroid test in a movie or TV show, they have to fail it at some point.
Well, it's just this is the. Maybe I might start doing a podcast dedicated to celebrating the Chekhov's MacGuffin and the incredibly diverse ways in which plots inevitably move forward.
Yeah, well, right, because here, right, we have essentially we have Chekhov's abusive boyfriend, right, for and I think that payoff for a lot of people, I think they would have been okay with it not paying off. I think that's one that I think from audiences when the way that Chekhov's punk, I guess maybe you call it Chekhov's punk, the way that pays off is one that people, again, like what I read on IMDb, some people didn't like the ending, and they didn't like how that paid off, so they didn't want to see that.
The one thing my one nitpick with the ending would be the use. He seems to use like an Uzi or a sort of machine gun pistol, which I mean, in America, I mean, probably every good home has a Uzi in it. But in Brit, like if he just had a pistol, then that would work. I wouldn't have bumped on it. I guess that would be the West way. It just seemed a bit jar. It's like, oh, that didn't seem like he would have that sort of weapon. Like if it was a pistol, it's like, okay, yeah, he's use criminal contacts to get one of those to get a gun to do this. But yeah, that seemed to I didn't quite believe that he would have that weapon. But yeah, a very minor gripe for me.
Yeah, because I think what it was, right, is that they wanted it to kill off the friend as well. That they needed that. I guess they needed that full circle tragedy element there. That the hubris of the friend who could have just
carried on with his nice, comfortable Essex life.
Right, because early on, really the only thing that Fairbrass asks of him is to borrow £20,000. He doesn't ask for him to be involved in any way. The friend offers because he's like, I need something. I'm bored here. I need to get involved with something. And that's when Fairbrass,
ropes him in.
Right. And so I wonder if that's why they needed to use that gun. But you're right. Like that was something I think that's, because when we're going to talk about the next film, Rise of the Foot Soldier, right? Like, there's nobody with Uzis or anything like that in that, And I also think, like in America too, I don't, that level of criminal that character was, he also wouldn't have had a gun like that. He probably would have had like a handgun. But again, like the handgun, it would have. I don't know. I wonder if too, like that. I don't know if maybe he thought that for us, we were so attached to Craig Fairbrass that if we see him just like take one between the eyes and hit the ground, and then that other character is the same. If he just shoots twice and hits them both. That if that would have been just too I don't know, like too strong for us.
Yeah, or maybe we would start thinking, oh, is that Craig Fairbrass's gun that he's using to shoot him? And maybe they wanted to have a completely different weapon that you wouldn't sort of think belonged to him. That I mean, I don't know how we would be expected to believe that Craig Fairbrass's gun had come into his possession. I don't know how, goodness knows how, but maybe they just wanted to just avoid any idea that it was somehow his gun by having a completely different weapon. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. But you're right. It was one of those things where I think it was like convenient for the plot, but it
you just bump on it, don't you?
Yeah, it sort of took a little bit of the verisimilitude out of it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Will, anything else on Villain?
The only thing to say is that some of the scenes are filmed just literally 30 yards down the road from where I work. So the pawn shop that we see that where Craig Fairbrass sells his watch and where he later holds up, that's just down the road from me. And there's a little scene where he jumps in, borrows a pen, going into a newsagent's. Again, I know that shop. I've been in there many times. And some of the alleys that Craig Fairbrass sort of runs into when he's making his escape from there are I know those streets. They're just down the road from my office, which again. The film was good enough to endear itself to me, but then to sort of know where some of those locations are, and to know that they're just down the road from where I work is endeared the film even further to me.
That is amazing. That's so cool to hear. Now, one of the things because my wife grew up here in Philadelphia, and remember this movie, The Shooter, with Mark Wahlberg. There's a scene where he's like escaping here, and she told me that and I actually kind of discovered it myself, having been here in Philadelphia a little bit more. But she was like, he's not driving in places that are connected to each other. That in one place he's in like the kind of the main part of Center City, Philadelphia. Other parts he's in the Northeast, and he just sort of bounces between these areas, and they just sort of cut it that way. Did you notice any kind of inconsistencies or anything like that when you saw him running?
Yeah. So I don't know where. So once he escapes after he robs the pawn shop, and he's then escaping down these various streets. So I recognize some, but then like the others that he's going down are not. I don't know where they are, because I've worked in my office for sort of over 10 years. I know all the streets around there, so I know that they are in a completely sort of different must be in a completely different area of London. The kind of cafe where he meets his sort of daughter, that's somewhere down in that's in an area of London called Balham. So they're obviously just they're kind of creating it's geographically there's geographical inconsistencies there, but there unless you really know, unless you're like me, you actually sort of work in the area, you're not going to spot them.
Yeah, I can see they work, because obviously in my case it didn't I didn't catch it, obviously, but I know like with the movie Shazam, I haven't seen the second Shazam, but the first one I saw, and that's shot here in Philadelphia, and so like for example, like he rescues the number 9 bus after he shoots it and it starts to fall off the overpass, and I've taken that number 9 bus over that overpass before, so it was like I knew all of that, but when the character is on the subway. They're actually on a commuter train, because the subways in Philadelphia do not look nice enough to be filmed in a movie. Whereas they have new commuter rail trains that they could use those for that. So and the other thing too was that the main character, Shazam buys beer for them at a convenience store. And in Philadelphia, in the state of Pennsylvania, with the blue laws, you can't buy beer in a convenience store. It is. It's for people coming from outside the United States, even for some of myself coming from New England, where the states that I lived in, they didn't have laws like that. But it is like the most frustrating thing, I think, for people. Like they're just like, "What? I can't buy beer in this convenience store or package or whatever." It's like, no, you gotta go to a grocery store, but then you have to buy it in a special location. It's all these different rules. But you recognize it in Shazam. I think they were just like, we can't get into all of these laws about buying beer, and we're just going to pretend that they're that you can just buy it like you can anywhere else. And so, yeah,
I'm all for That's the magic of the movies, Matt, isn't it?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Excellent. Well, that was a really great note to leave this on. So what we'll do is we'll take a break, and then when we come back, we'll do Rise of the Foot Soldier Part 3.
Hey everyone, we'll get back to the podcast in a second, but first I have a new novel out, Holtman Arms. It follows Colvin Hall, an aspiring writer who decides to write a romance novel on a whim, sends it to a publisher, and it becomes a huge success. The only problem is, no one knows it's him because he writes under the pen name Mary Ballantyne. With all of the money and none of the fame, Colvin longs for the world to recognize his accomplishments. When he gets an opportunity to write a freelance article on a washed-up 90s pop star looking for a comeback, that recognition starts to come, but is it all he hoped for? It doesn't matter, because he's getting it whether he likes it or not. Holdman Arms is the second in my author's cycle after A Girl and a Gun, and like that previous novel, it explores themes of success and accomplishment in the 21st century. You can buy it now through Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. The link is in the podcast description. As always, thanks for your support.
All right, we are back, and we are going to look at, for our second Craig Fairbrass film, we're looking at Rise of the Foot Soldier Part 3. So I kind of have a sense of maybe what the plot is. I guess it's that there was a gangland or a drug dealer kind of murder that took place in the mid 90s, and one of the people involved in that murder, or who was killed in that murder, Pat Tate, is played by Craig Fairbrass, and we're kind of seeing what his origin is, I guess, to some extent. Is that roughly what we have here?
Yeah, that is exactly what we have here. So the first Rise of the Foot Soldier film came out in 2007, and very strangely, there's quite a bit to go through here, Matt, but bear with me. So the first Rise of the Foot Soldier film is actually centers on a character you don't see at all in this in this particular film. So that was based on the memoirs of a guy called Carlton Leach, who was kind of football hooligan who sort of became a criminal, and he was moved in the same criminal sort of circles as Pat Tate, Tony Tucker, and Craig Rolfe, who are the the three sort of characters who are the center point of the film we're watching here, Rise of Foot Soldier, Pat Tate story. So yeah, the kind of where these films begin is with a very famous sort of criminal incident in UK, which was what are called either the Range Rover murders or the Rettendon murders, where these three criminals, Pat Tate, Tony Tucker, and Craig Rolfe, were executed, basically sitting in a Range Rover that was sort of down some like farm track leading down to some farmers field. So basically it was like a gangland execution. Now three criminals being shot dead by other criminals, that's probably just another Wednesday in the United States. In Britain, that's not normal. And so this particular incident was a huge media sensation at the time as to who had killed these people, why had they been killed, what had these people been doing that had led them to be executed in such a violent and clearly deliberate way. And I mean, I'm afraid I'm not kind of up enough on American culture to think of a sort of an analog for this, but this particular crime continues to continues to exist in the sort of public consciousness of the UK public. So we've had multiple films like depicting the murders here or the characters here, or set in the kind of the world of these like Essex murders. There have been numerous books. There have been been numerous documentaries, but there was a new kind of 2 or 3 part documentary series that came out on one of our major broadcasters this year, basically looking at were the people who were sent to prison ultimately for committing these murders, were they actually the people who did them? Because there's quite a lot of and certainly a number of people believe that that's an unsafe conviction, because it was largely on the word of a grass that they were sent to prison. And so this is a kind of very famous sort of criminal incident. So as I mentioned, the first film essentially is it's very strange. The first film, kind of Pat Tate, Tony Tucker, and Craig Rolfe, they're kind of minor characters, because that film centers on this guy called Carlton Leach, who wrote this, was, I say, football hooligan, then later a criminal, wrote this memoir. He moved in the same sort of criminal circles as these guys, and that first film is essentially telling Carlton Leach's story, and we see Craig Fairbrass and his mates get murdered at the end of that film. The second Rise of the Foot Soldier story is again following the Carlton Leach character, kind of how he like responds in the aftermath of the murder of these guys that he was sort of friends with New. And that film, though, then with this third film, there's it's a sort of pivot point for the entire franchise. So Carlton Leach is completely like written out of this film and this kind of the continuing adventures of the Rise of the Foot Soldier franchise. So suddenly Craig Fairbrass becomes the central character in the story, and as you were saying, this is essentially his origin story. So we see him be pulled into the world of criminality, start to move into the sort of drugs trade, and we see how his increasingly reckless behavior kind of creates a number of enemies who might then want to ultimately rub him and his his two mates out. So yeah, that's where we get to with the Rise of the Foot Soldiers. So obviously this film is a prequel because obviously Craig Fairbrass, we see him murdered at the end of the first film, and Craig Fairbrass, the Terry Stone who plays Tony Tucker and Roland Manookian who plays Craig Rolfe, they all then become the principal characters in the subsequent films. So this is a very bizarre franchise in the sense of like entries 3, 4, 5, and the one that's going to be coming out this year, number 6, Rise of the Foot Soldier Vengeance, are all prequels, even though they're all these the actors playing them are all 16 years older than they were when they first played them back in 2007. They're all these are all prequels, even though the fact that as you mentioned earlier, Craig Fairbrass is pushing 60 now.
Right. Right, because I was surprised that his character was supposed to be in his late 30s. I guess he was like maybe mid 30s when he died. Because I get the sense that maybe it was like even like really like the Irishman with like Robert De Niro playing somebody like in his 20s perhaps that was who it was. But I mean there is a scene at the very beginning where him and then Josh Myers, who plays the Ken character, who's kind of his partner, when they're beating up these guys, these Spaniard these guys in Spain who are trying to take their money from them or take the drugs or whatever, and they're beating them up. You can really see that Fairbrass is definitely getting on in his years. Like he's not as lithe when he's sort of doing some of the punching and fighting and stuff like that, which I think is one area where this differs from Villain, where Villain didn't want him to do that kind of stuff. He never really had to do anything that they were leaning into his age, obviously, whereas he was having to play someone almost 30 years younger, I guess, in this.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I don't know how much longer they intend to keep this Rise of the Foot Soldier franchise going, but it's going to become a sort of increasing issue, because I think the idea was that actually the third one, or that would be the last one, and they sort of keep making one more, and I don't know. I mean, they keep making them. I'm still going to watch them, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Time is, you can't escape the march of time. So I don't know. This is not a franchise that can afford the sort of expensive de-aging CGI that we've just seen on Harrison Ford in the latest Indiana Jones movie.
Yes, or was it the Mandalorian, where it just looks really creepy, where they just sort of took a younger Luke Skywalker face and put it on Mark Hamill or somebody that was just like really weird. Yeah, I think they're sort of just I think they're hoping, I guess, like you said, that sort of the allure of that crime, of that murder, of that triple homicide, that the allure of that is enough to have people sort of ignore the rest of it. But yeah, I mean, I guess overall, Will, what did you think of Rise of the Foot Soldier 3?
Well, this is my favorite, and I would actually argue it's the best in the series, but that's subjective. If somebody prefers one of the other ones, I'm not going to I'm not going to go and get my baseball bat and go to town on them as most disagreements are settled in the Rise of the Foot Soldier franchise with the use of a baseball bat or a hammer. I mean, I think that this film has I don't know, you're not familiar with the rest of the series. I get the sense that the budget for this one was bigger than the other films that they've had to work with, and certainly there's lots of the location filming that they do in Spain. I mean, there's drone shots in there as well. There's very good use of like popular music in this film, which again, that music licensing is never cheap, and so that must have eaten up quite a bit of the money. And yeah, I just think that this film, it just you get, Craig Fairbrass creates, I think, an incredible character in this here, because you get somebody who is he conveys this sort of like gregarious charm, I guess, but he can turn it on a sixpence in an instant and then just be like, like a complete psychopath, like somebody who is just got no any kind of like filter or restraint when it comes to, like, if you irritate me, I am going to smash your face in. And I'm not even, I don't know like where the line is. I'm just going to keep doing it until like your brains are like pulp across the floor of this table. So he just creates this like, as I say, kind of character who has this sort of like duality. And I guess they're sort of, and I guess the sort of anti-heroes, as they just sort of blaze their way through the kind of criminal underworld in Essex. And I guess going back to that element of tragedy, kind of sow the seeds for their own downfall. So and going back to that point that I was making earlier, it's always interesting for somebody in Britain to see British crime stories being told. And so this is a very famous crime in the UK, and it's I mean, it's not, maybe it's not terribly savory, but there's it's the old thing about rubbernecking at car accidents or whatever. You can't help but be drawn into sort of like wanting to see, being intrigued by like, okay, how they're going to tell that particular story.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in particular with Craig Fairbrass. Again, I think like Villain, I like Villain a little bit more than this, but I think just like Villain, he plays this central sort of planet, star, whatever that the satellites all sort of revolve around. But what I liked about it too, like you said, that he's this character who can kind of turn on a dime and suddenly be like this most vicious person, and it's almost like kind of with Tony Soprano in The Sopranos, where David Chase, when he made that show, he really wanted to make sure that we didn't like Tony Soprano too much. And I think one of the failures for him, or one of the failures of that show, was that too many people just thought Tony Soprano was the best, and they kind of wanted to go out and be their own gangsters. But when you watch it, part of the genius of the show, my wife is a huge fan of Sopranos, so I watched it with her. She's watched it I don't know how many times through. But I watched it one of those times that she watched it through, so I got to see it myself. But the show really doesn't let you like him too much. There are times where they want you to like him. They want you to sympathize with him, that he's kind of the hero. But there are other times where you're supposed to be repulsed by him, or you're supposed to not, and I think Fairbrass does a great job of that here. I mean, I think the writing also does it. I mean, some of it, when he gets out of prison, and instead of meeting his wife and his newborn daughter, he goes out and sleeps with prostitutes and does a whole bunch of coke and goes to strip clubs all night. And it's like, you can't sympathize with someone who does that, or like the way that he sets himself up as this person that you don't want to really be around. I mean, when he's in Spain, where he's trying to evade the law, the guy that's sort of there housing him and having him work for him is just like, I don't want to be around this guy, because he's he's 6'4" and he's psychotic. And when he decides he's not happy with you, there's nothing you can do about it, right? Because he's you got to hope you have a hammer. You got to hope that somebody is standing by with a hammer behind him that can knock him out, right? That's the only way you can really deal with him. And he plays that all so well, that again, like, I kind of ignore the fact that his character is in his 50s when he's supposed to be in his mid 30s, because of how compelling he is.
I completely agree, and I think that there is that especially the point you were making about not wanting to like him too much. I mean, there are a lot of moments in this film I mean, the one that comes to my mind is the scene where he has sex with his wife in prison. So he's paid off a guard to like have sex, you know, in a kind of room with his, and I mean, it's basically rape, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, and she really doesn't want to have sex with him at that moment, and it's a really like you know, I'm always these types of scenes. I'm always a bit wary of them. Like sometimes I think there's an element of voyeurism to them, but this one, I think it's actually like an important sort of, you know, character moment, and you know, and it's also like key to his kind of, you know, how his relationship with his wife then goes, and then it also as I say, speaks that sort of thing as, you know what, this guy is actually like an absolute piece of scum. And you know, like, just, you know, for all these other moments where he's, you know, he's maybe, you know, in a bar fight with a bunch of gypsies, and you're kind of like, yeah, you're reveling in you know, Fairbrass, you know, going to town on like a whole bunch of people and just, you know, taking on all comers. Like that scene like that just reminds you of like who, you know, who this person really is, or kind of what the reality of a person like that is actually like. And yeah, it's yeah, Fairbrass manages to, it's in the script, but then yeah, Fairbrass also like really sells it in his performance.
Yeah, and even better on that too is that the next scene when she shows up, the next time she's there and she meets him, and he's like, "I've arranged for another room for us," and she's like, "I'm not going with you. I'm not doing that." And he's like, "What? You didn't like it the last time? Like you didn't like in his mind, he
Yeah.
he thought she enjoyed what happened there, right? That she was into
Yeah.
it. So it's like another piece too where his character is he's a psychopath, but he can't read the room at all.
Mm.
And in a way, almost right, almost like you talked about the inevitability of what's going to happen with him. You know, I mean, again, I know, you know, kind of what they're trying to do is piece together what this, you know, this Pat Tate's life would have been that led to what happened there. And it's almost like the movie tried to set up this mindset of like, you know, Pat Tate with his, you know, with his two mates, you know, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, they're so out of control that somebody has to do something with them, right? And that there's that scene where you know, we get Billy Murray, who plays Mickey Steele, who's kind of a higher up, that you know, Pat Tate or Fairbrass meets in prison. And Billy Murray is great, right? He's kind of always going to be that character that he plays. You know, it's the old crime boss. You know, he does that so well. And he goes and meets with them kind of out in this dirt road that sort of, again, it kind of like predicts, you know, or kind of a harbinger of what's going to come for these three men. But he meets them out in this old country road, and he says to them, "Cool it." And Pat Tate actually gets short with him, right? He gets curt with him, says something like, "Oh, I heard you, I got you, whatever," you know. And Billy Murray just kind of looks at him like, "Okay, hey, I gave you a chance," you know. And you can see that Pat Tate doesn't read it, right? He doesn't read it the way we read it, right? The way we understand what's going on there. It's so that there's that inevitability, but he can't read the room. He's not capable of doing it. He's not capable of understanding how people perceive him or perceive things around him. And it's almost like, you know, and maybe that was something that they picked up from, you know, kind of talking to people about him, that like he completely couldn't read how people thought about him.
Yeah, I don't. It's hard to know sort of how much of this, how accurate sort of stuff in this film is. Like, there are kind of a very broad brush. There are like incidents in this in the film which are taken from real life, but I don't think. I think that the film has essentially sort of taken quite a cynical decision, in the sense of these people are dead, and they are now kind of like sort of blank cards on which we can kind of create sort of personalities and characters on. So yeah, I think so it's a bit hard to know how much. I think it's hard to know, and I would be very wary of like of sort of you know, how much representing the real people there is in these films. But yeah, I mean, again, you know, talking about the sort of, he's warned by Billy Murray there, and sort of earlier when they're in prison together, he's sort of, I think there's a line, something about, you know, it's the loud ones, or something like, you know, it's the quiet ones that last, or it's the loud ones that never last, or something. And again, you know, just sort of foreshadowing. And I think, you know, that is accurate to the film, that there was that is the suggestion that what lay behind these murders was that these guys were just getting completely out of hand, and it was causing more problems for the sort of the criminal, like, class, that these people was that they'd been warned, and okay, they just need to be taken out, because it was just creating problems for everyone else, problems that they just seemed completely oblivious to, and as you say, couldn't read the room.
Yeah, because it's interesting, like when with the Sam character played by Jamie Foreman, who's kind of like the wise mentor to Pat Tate, and of course what happens is, right, is that Pat Tate, because he's so big and imposing, and and again, like you talked about, where a triple homicide, with a shotgun is something that wouldn't happen, is a rarity in England. Most of what's going on is done, most of the interactions, the violent interactions, don't involve guns. They involve either blunt objects or knives or broken glasses, things like that. So Pat Tate just becomes very integral to what they're doing, right? They can't, the moment that we think that Pat Tate's going to jail, suddenly his rivals start to close in and try to take over things, because they don't have to worry about him now. And it's interesting because that character of Sam, he gives Pat Tate some more of that advice, the same way Billy Murray does, right? He's like, listen, when there's a whole situation with the Pikeys, which I only know of them through Snatch, so I don't know enough, but I know, I know they're sort of a nomadic group in England, but what we know of them in Snatch, right, is that you don't like, and maybe that's part of where Guy Ritchie got that from. Maybe he'd heard this part of the story, right, and he was like, yeah, let's just have them just sort of kind of go in there and take everyone down. But there's that part of him where Sam's like, I brokered a deal with the Pikeys, so you don't have to keep fighting this, because you're not going to win. They're going to keep coming and keep coming. And Pat Tate begrudgingly agrees to it because it's Sam telling him, but really he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to have the
yeah, I mean, he just, I mean, that's, sort of, that's the nature of the character. He just, anyone threatens him, he's just like, I'm just gonna smash him. I'm just, I'll just go through him. We're not, and there's no sense of compromise. But yeah, talking of the character, the actor who plays the kind of the king of the gypsies, or I should really we should really be referring to them as travelers, Matt. But in this, especially in this, lest your podcast become cancelled. But the guy who is head kind of king of the travelers is actually is a guy called Paddy Doherty, who is actually like a member of that community, and he's was a bare knuckle, sort of infamous for sort of being a bare knuckle fighter. So there's some very judicious casting there, which just probably you as an American wouldn't. I mean, Paddy Doherty, as I say, is somebody you would know in the UK because of his sort of the stuff. I mean, he's been on reality TV programs and things now in the UK. So it's something that American audiences might not sort of pick up on immediately, that actually this guy playing this character is kind of he's kind of playing himself in this film.
No, that's really good, because I didn't. So obviously, I wouldn't have known who he was, and so that's actually kind of a really cool wrinkle, because he definitely. I could see, like if I had known, right, like if I had that sort of that background of understanding of who he is, right, it would have probably been like a really great reveal when they go out to meet with the travelers and have the truce. When we get that reveal of who it is, that would have been like a really big reveal that for me, unfortunately I missed it.
Yeah, which speaks to kind of what we were sort of talking about before, which is like how well do these films export? Because I think within the cast there are a lot of those types of actors that you would know them if you're British, but like how well do you know them outside of the UK? So Paddy Doherty being a good example of that, but somebody like Jamie Foreman, who you've already mentioned, Larry Lamb, who plays the kind of the big sort of like the Spanish crime boss. He's another sort of actor who I don't know. Have you ever come across him before? He's somebody be very well known in the UK, but I'm guessing he's not someone known outside of these shores too well.
That's a good question. So of course I'm looking at his picture here because he had glasses on in the film.
Mm.
Oh, interesting. When I go to his IMDb page, they're showing him as a minor. It looks like in Superman 3. So he had like a small part he was a reporter. Oh, he was second minor in Superman 3. So of course I never
I'm
caught that.
amazed you don't remember him, Matt.
Yes, right. Right. Yes. I remember the scene, but yeah, I did. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah,
but just to jump in again, like even somebody like Billy Murray, who I know you're sort of familiar with, like you talking about some of the sort of Shogun films that he's been in. He's been an actor for like over 50 years, and he's somebody who was kind of got into acting in the late 60s, early 70s, because he was basically somebody who was sort of like on the fringes of the craze, and he kind of moved in those circles. And so most of his early roles are like playing criminals. And he was actually in a very quite a sort of famous British crime thriller film from the early 70s, starring Richard Burton, also called Villain, bizarrely, which ties into our podcast. But yeah, Billy Murray, again, he's somebody who, because he's played a lot of criminals over his life, and he's somebody who's got those associations with like everyone knows Billy Murray, oh yeah, he's kind of like grew up being friendly with the craze. He brings that, like I don't know, that, not kudos is the wrong word, but he kind of brings that sort of his real world associations into whenever he's cast in a role like this. He brings that sort of his personal backstory with him into the characters that he's portraying.
Yeah, that makes sense. He would be probably the best comp for him in the U.S. would be Tony Sirico from Sopranos, because he also I don't remember what crime family he was with, but he was in the mob.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah, and I don't know how he got. I don't know exactly how it works in terms of getting out or any of that kind of thing. Where I live in Philadelphia, the part of Philadelphia that I live in, I believe, does have it is slightly controlled by the mob. Which for me, what it means is, because there's a lot of crime in Philadelphia now, it means we don't really get much of that crime here. It's actually a pretty safe area where we live. But yeah, I think he was one of the New York crime families. He was I can't remember which one it was. I don't remember, because I looked it up before. But so then of course he started doing roles with like Scorsese and everything. And yeah, so kind of the same thing where he's got those bona fides, I guess, that from having. Of course, he's no longer with us, but I think they're about the same age. I think they were. So that's interesting. I didn't know that about Billy Murray, but I can see it. Like when I was watching Nemesis, like the way he would walk, he really wanted to do that kind of like gangster kind of walk and stuff like that. And yeah, I can totally see that there. And I kind of, like you said, I know of him because of that, because of I turned out I did a movie that was actually produced by Jonathan Southcott from Shogun Films, called Strippers versus Werewolves, and I didn't realize it had Billy Murray, and also maybe another connection to the craze. It had Martin Kemp from Spandau Ballet,
yes.
Who remember I guess the twin brothers, they were in the Craze movie.
That's right. Yes. I mean, one thing to say, just talking about sort of overlaps of actors, is that, as I mentioned earlier, that this particular kind of criminal incident has spawned a whole range of films. So we've got what are shortly to be 6 Rise of the Foot Soldier films. The first film that kind of exploited these murders was a film that came out in 2000 starring Sean Bean, called Essex Boys. That has then subsequently had 2 sequels: Essex Boys Retribution, Essex Boys Law of Survival. Now we've also had The Fall of the Essex Boys, and then there's another franchise called Bonded by Blood. There's 2 films in that, and the overlap in actors is mind blowing. So for like, in the Bonded by Blood series, the guy who plays Tony Tucker in the Rise of the Foot Soldier movies, played by Terry Stone, he's also in the Bonded by Blood movies playing Tony Tucker. But all the other characters, like Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe, they're played by other actors. So there's a completely, I can't think of another analog where you've got an actor playing the same role but in a different franchise of films where they're not like there's no continuity to them. They're not meant to be part of the same universe. Larry Lamb and Billy Murray both turn up in the Essex Boys franchise. The director of Rise of the Foot Soldier Origins turns up as an actor in the Fall of the Essex Boys. The guy who plays Craig Rolfe in the first Rise of the Foot Soldier movies, he turns up in one of the Bonded by Blood movies, playing Darren Nichols, the guy who kind of grasses up the murderers of Pat Tate, Tony Tucker, and Rolfe. So there's this weird like haphazard multiverse of kind of like of the Essex Boys movies, or the kind of Essex Murders movies, where yeah, I mean it's very messy, but probably not even as messy as the DC universe, and that's actually sort of meant to be sort of intentional.
It is fast because I was kind of just sort of like opening these up on different tabs on IMDb to kind of get a sense of them myself, and it's like, yeah, you're seeing Larry Lamb, I'm seeing all these names, that kind of come up, and it's almost like, I guess it's almost like a sense of like, well, you must know what we're looking for, so let's have you in here and make the movie. And yeah, and I mean, talking about the craze, I mean, that's another one, right? That there are a lot of different film adaptations of them, right? Or like there's a lot of movies where they just sort of slap the craze name on it or something like that.
Yeah, I mean they are figures that continue to get sort of films made about them. The difficulty I think with like continuing to do sort of craze movies, and why Essex Boys ones are much easier, is because obviously those the craze were from the sort of 1960s, and if you're operating in the world of like DTV, doing a film that is set in a bygone time period immediately makes the budget on sets and cars and costumes that much more expensive. Whereas with the Essex Boys, or kind of with the Rise of the Foot Soldier franchise movies, I mean, obviously all the characters died in 1995. So I think in this film, the third film, they're quite at pains to make sure that the cars are like accurate to the period, and if someone uses a mobile phone, it's deliberately made to look old fashioned. But in some of the later films, they're kind of that sort of dedication to being sort of accurate to the time period eases somewhat. So they try to anything glaringly obvious that would be like, that couldn't exist in 1995 is eliminated, but they don't. They're less at pains. They're less worried about what the cars look like and things like that in some of the later films. So I think the sort of the craze. I think if we're going to see more movies by them, they're going to be featuring those characters. They're going to be more ones which have got kind of like proper budgets attached to them, rather than the kind of sphere of filmmaking the kind of budget of filmmaking that we're working with here, which is, and actually just apologies, I've been talking for a while here, but just one more thing on the budget. I don't know if you're aware, but most sort of recently, a lot of the Rise of the Foot Soldier films have been, part of their financing has been crowdsourcing money. So you can pay money and you can be listed as a executive director, and they have different tiers of support. And there is a tier of support where you can kind of be an extra in the film, and if you're prepared to pay a little bit more money, you can be in a fight scene and get punched by Craig Fairbrass if you put in enough cash. And I have to say, I have been tempted on occasion.
That would be amazing, because there's that one scene right towards the end, right, kind of towards as we're kind of getting to the end of the film, where they stop to get gas at the gas station, and I will be honest, this is an area where in America, like, you see more of this kind of like this road rage kind of thing, but also there is a sense too of like you I don't know, I don't know if maybe you wait a little bit longer, but I think for me, I guess, well, no, because you wouldn't have seen Craig Fairbrass. He would have been he was in the gas station, he was in the station paying and getting things, so I guess you wouldn't have known that he was there. But I know for me, I would have just had us in the car and just been like, let's wait until these guys leave before we go out. But there's this old man, this older fellow who's confronting Craig Fairbrass because of the way they've parked their car to get gas. They've made it so nobody else can get gas, and so another man with his wife and daughters had pulled up, and And yeah, when he goes out to confront Craig Fairbrass, and Fairbrass just decks him, just knocks him cold. And that would be an amazing thing to pay money for. And I don't know, in my case, because I don't drive, so I'm one of the few Americans that doesn't drive. I don't know if they would have been able to use me in that scene. Like if that was the one, right? I don't know what scene. I guess maybe it would have been maybe more like you show up as one of the travelers,
Yeah.
running, But I agree with you that would be pretty amazing to say that you got decked on screen by Craig Fairbrass.
I mean, I think I could, happily die. Die a happy man if I could have that as a claim to fame. But one thing I wanted to sort of ask you about, because these British, we're watching a kind of pair of British crime films here, and I guess in any American crime, the violence here is, I think, sort of very different. I would argue, to sort of typical, the kind of equivalent of American crime films, because the availability of guns in the UK is much less and much more restricted than it is in the United States. And most of the violence here is as you were describing earlier, it's like, pool cues, it's broken bottles, baseball bats, knuckle dusters. And I guess I wanted to just, do you, as an American looking on at this film, do you just think that this is hopelessly quaint, or do you sort of enjoy seeing, I don't know, a bit of more sort of like old school primitive violence? I wondered what you made of the kind of the portrayal of violence in this film.
No, what I like about it is, I think the problem with guns, right, is that guns are they're pretty final, right? There's a finality to guns, and it makes it very hard when you do these kinds of things in America, because it's like, well, why wouldn't they use a gun? They would use a gun there, but then it's like the gun, and everything's done. So then what they end up having to do is find ways to either disarm the gun or make the gun not, like they have to find some way to remove the gun.
Run out of bullets.
Right.
Okay,
exactly.
Let's do this. Yeah. Or one of those ridiculous scenes where they're kind of like, let's do this the old-fashioned way, and you kind of, they both put down the.
Yeah, or like the shootouts where people are shooting and missing each other, right? Where you get that sort of like this sort of rinse and repeat kind of thing. And so I definitely didn't think it was quaint. I will say that, because I mean, this is very visceral violence that we're seeing here on the screen, and I think that the one thing is, I think the movie may have pulled some punches a bit where it could have gotten worse, but I don't know. I mean, like when he's in the prison, and of course, like prison violence that was very similar to what you'd see in American prison film. And it was actually probably a little bit worse. Like I think again, they would pull punches on the prison violence. Usually, just somebody gets shanked in the stomach and they call it good, and you walk on. Whereas they weren't gonna let us off easy with that there. But yeah, I think it's one of the things that makes it difficult with American films, is that you've got to, either it's like Tarantino kind of pulling from the old history of like Westerns, of like what they call the Mexican standoff, where everybody's got guns on each other, and you've got to almost kind of find a way to make guns not an element. But even with Westerns, right? I mean, my wife watches the retro channel here, and so they have Westerns on during the day, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to develop things, because guns are so final, and they're so even though, like, yes, I mean, a baseball bat is still pretty violent, but there's not the level of finality to it that guns have. And so I think in a way it's actually a little bit more refreshing to be able to see something like that.
Yeah, because otherwise the only way to make a sort of extended sort of gun sequence work is if you go down the sort of John Wick or Matrix sort of line, where you just have like an infinite number of like nameless goons who can just run out to be mown down, and then then you can have a sequence that sort of goes on for more than 10 seconds, because there's still another 2,000 extras to be machine gun to death. So yeah, it's and I completely understand the point that you were making, but just circling back to the prison violence that you were talking about there, did you recognize the kind of prison boss Mad Dog at all?
I didn't. Let me take a look at the name, but I don't. Oh, I saw on his IMDb page that he's singing. So was he in a band in England?
He was in. Have you heard of the Happy Mondays?
No. What do they have a hit that?
Well, they had many hits. So they were kind of part of this like Manchester scene that sort of came out in the late 80s. So
Oh,
Loose Fit. And what was there? What was that? Oh God, I'm
now
blanking
is
on the.
in the Do They Know It's Christmas, the the Feed the World video. Is that the guy from the Happy Mondays who is singing in between? I think it's like
I
because
think
American.
you're thinking of Shane MacGowan,
Oh,
who
okay,
was in the
right.
Pogues. So Happy Mondays is different. So
Okay.
they were a big band that sort of came out of Manchester, who sort of fused like sort of indie rock with like the acid house scene. Um, and so they kind of created this sort of like hybrid sort of music of like sort of rock music, but that had a kind of a quite sort of druggy vibe that sort of fitted in with the sort of dance music culture of the late 80s and early 90s. And Shaun Ryder sort of then went on, did a band called Black Grape as well. So yeah, that's just a bit of stunt casting, having him as the kind of prison boss. But we see sort of Craig Fairbrass has a confrontation with him, and then then the film sort of cuts to, like, I can't remember what scene it is, but it's basically like a punch up in a pub or something, where which is soundtracked by one of the Happy Mondays songs. So there's a bit of sort of, as I say, bit of stunt casting there, and a bit of tongue in cheek musical cues being done there as well.
That's interesting. So yeah, so you know what it is with that period of music from the UK is that there's like a gap in American music, from the UK, where it's like you have that sort of that second British invasion during the rise of MTV, right? Where you get like Duran
Mm,
Duran, Spin About, because American artists didn't make videos to the same extent that English ones did. So then you had like all, British ones where they needed to play, Hungry Like the Wolf twice an hour because they didn't have any other videos to play. So there was that, and then it starts to fade as you get to the late '80s. Like When in Rome had a big hit with The Promise, but and I think Breathe with Hands to Heaven, but a lot of those, Johnny H. Jazz, but that it was kind of starting to fade. Rick Astley, of course, and then there's like a bit of a gap until like Pulp and Oasis and Blur and them come in the mid '90s, and it seems like the Happy Mondays were right in that area. I mean, there were some dance groups from England that were big in America from that period. Soul to Soul, I think, is one that definitely Back to
mm.
Life. So there were some that were dance music that was big, but that one, yeah, the Happy Mondays, they would have probably fallen right in that gap where they were just after Duran Duran, but before Pulp and
Yeah.
Oasis and those.
Did you know? Have you heard of the Stone Roses?
Yes, yeah,
So the
I've heard of
Stone
them.
Roses, Happy Mondays, they were part of the sort of same musical scene, which, as you were saying, that happened right in that sort of gap between sort of the late 80s and then what you like, things like Pulp and Blur, which we would sort of talk about as Brit pop. So they were part of, yeah, Stone Roses and Happy Mondays were sort of part of a sort of different scene, which, yeah, as I say, was kind of fusing sort of like indie rock, but with the sort of like some dance culture, sort of essentially the sort of production that they were doing to kind of create a bit of a crossover between sort of scenes there.
Yeah, so the artists that actually did make it to America. So Stone Roses, I remember because we had the show on MTV called 120 Minutes that would be on like Sunday night from like midnight to 2 a.m. and they would just kind of play all the indie stuff at that time. And some of the groups that did make it at that time, in the early 90s were like definitely more of like what we think of as alternative or modern rock. So like the Tuesdays, but here's what was that song called? Where the story ends, or here's the, but then like the Laws, There She Goes, James, those were the
Mm,
groups that
yeah,
made it over here, and a lot of them only had like one or two hits at a time.
I don't think they had that many more hits in the UK either, but
That makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I remember when I went to England in '97. The Prodigy was only really on that 120 minutes show. And Blur also, they hadn't had Song 2 yet, so they were also they were kind of, in Pulp was another one, like nobody really knew them. So when I went to England, I went to like all the HMVs and bought up all the Prodigy singles. I was like, oh, this is really great. And then I was at Firestarter was the one that was big here. Breathe, one of those was just blew up here when about like a month or two after I got back from the trip to England, and suddenly like all of those import CD singles that had all the B-sides that I was collecting, all of them were available here in America for like a fraction of the cost that I was paying over there. And so I had money that I could have been spending on souvenirs and things like that I was just, blowing on CDs at that time. So yeah,
I'm glad the pain of that expense has eased over the last 25 years. Still clearly still burns.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I just remember it being like, I was so cool because I was out in front of the, it was like, I still had that mindset, I think I was like, 18 at the time. I had that mindset of like, well, now that everybody else likes the Prodigy, I can't like them, and it was like, but I still listened to them, but it was like that, I wasn't going to wear my Prodigy shirt that I bought over at Leicester Square. That's good. The other thing I remember about that is going to Leicester Square to buy, band shirts and things like that. I saw a big poster for the Backstreet Boys. And I said, there is no way that's going to make it in America. Nobody in America is going to like that boy band crap. We wouldn't, and within a year, it was like that was like what was topping the charts here. So I was wrong on a few fronts there. My predictions for music were not very good.
So you haven't gone into record label A&R then?
Right, exactly right. I wouldn't know what I'm doing. Yeah. So it's funny. One thing I realized about my trip to England at that time was that, and I think this kind of dovetails a little bit to what I was going to talk about with just sort of the setting of this film and sort of Essex and London and all of that, is that I realized that when I went in '97 to England, the only major city in the United States that I'd been to was Boston, which was close to where I grew up. So I'd never been to New York at that time. I had never been to Los Angeles, which I've been to now, or Dallas, or any of the other big cities. And I hadn't even ridden the subway in Boston. We would just drive in and do whatever we were going to do and drive out. So like my first time being on the subway was in London. And I think I didn't have a full, I always think that I don't remember a lot of my trip to England because it was I was 18 and I could drink legally. So we were drinking a lot on that trip. But I also think too, that I had no frame of reference for what London is, because it was the only big city I'd ever been to. So I didn't have a New York to compare it to or anything like that. I mean, I don't know how I managed to navigate the subway as well as I did. I think it's because people were helpful and things like that. One story I do remember talking about the gun violence piece of it. One time we were riding the subway, it was very crowded, and I was getting pushed back, and this woman behind me said, "Don't let them push you back like that." She must have thought I was an American kid who didn't know what he was doing. And I said, as they would say in England, a cheeky bastard that I was, I said, in America, if you push the wrong person in the city, you might get shot. And so, of course, like everybody around me kind of looked at me like, whoa, who is it? Like what? Talking about, So, so that was kind of one experience there that I remember. But I think, in watching this movie, I think one of the things I try to sort of, we always in America, we always equate London with New York, right? We always compare those two like that. But they really don't compare equally because, for example, London is the financial center, maybe of Europe, even kind of Europe. I know Frankfurt's trying to grow there, but I think London is that financial center, at least of England, and New York's the financial center of America. But then the political center of America is Washington D.C., whereas the political center of England is London. The entertainment center, right? Movies are made in London, whereas in America they're made in Los Angeles. The tech industry is in San Francisco, whereas again in England it's in London. So there really isn't a city like London in America, maybe even in the world. And I think part of it is like thinking how big what kind of gravitational pull it has. One of the things I was going to ask you about is sort of, because they bring up Essex a lot, like sort of how those two are related in conjunction with each other.
Yeah, it's Matt. That's a really interesting question, and I'm afraid I am not going to be able to give you as fuller answer as I would like. Yeah. But I mean, it's a really interesting point. So I think like the Essex has its own sort of identity, which is, as I say, it's hard for me to kind of like describe it really in a shorthand, because I haven't in a briefly or in a terribly articulate way, because it's not something that I've completely sort of thought through. But like the Essex does have its own sort of culture or sort of culture isn't not quite the right word. It does have its own sort of image and associations, and it has had that for a long time. So, I think one thing about Essex is that it is where a lot of people who left London ended up. So through periods of gentrification in London, you had a lot of like East End communities who essentially moved out to Essex because house prices, there was money to be made by selling up to like developers in the East End and then taking your money and moving out to Essex, where you could get much more. You could use that inflated money that you'd been paid for your for your house or your flat, and use that to buy something, buy a detached house in Essex. But there's always been a sort of this idea of Essex as being somewhere, I guess, that is a bit sort of devoid of taste, of like being cheap and tacky. So going back to like the sort of like when I was a kid in the 80s, you'd be like, there was this sort of thing of people referring to women as Essex girls, which meant that they'd be wearing some very, very short skirt, some very, very sort of tight top, and they'd be pretty easy with their virtue, if if you follow my meaning, and that has like continued sort of like on. So like today we have a lot of these reality sort of TV shows where I'm afraid I'm not up on the, I can't think of, I mean, they're all versions of shows that you get in America. There are these like, they're what they call them, sort of like scripted reality programs, and so they're sort of invariably like people who are, I don't know, spend an awful lot of time in like tanning shops with like overly whitened teeth, and their only sort of concerns in life is, I don't know, like I don't know who their best, I don't know, something their best, something their girlfriend, something their kind of best friend's boyfriend said to them at a nightclub or something, and then there's some big sort of to do. So there's all these shows here with sort of like in the UK, I'm afraid I can't even remember the names, and things like The Only Way is Essex, and there's innumerable sort of clones of them. So there is a sort of an idea of Essex having its own sort of identity, and not necessarily one that is overly favourable. And the kind of and that sort of the sort of the criminality that we see in this film with these murders, that then like pales into the idea of Essex, because it's sort of like Essex is a place where, I know, a lot of like people who are sort of like criminals, sort of then move out to, criminals in London, then, get enough money together, they sort of then move out to Essex. So there is all these, these films being set in Essex brings with it a set of associations, which I think British people are going to be sort of intuitively know and understand, even though I'm doing a very bad job of articulating them to them, in a way in which you as an outsider, I mean, you've clearly detected it, but you're kind of like, hey, what am I supposed to what am I supposed to sort of read into or understand from the sort of the things that you've picked up sort of from reading between the lines of like dialogue and scenes that you've seen in the film?
Well, yeah. So this description actually works really well from at least from me as a Northeastern American, because it sounds like you're describing New Jersey vis-a-vis New York, in a lot of ways. Between like the fashions being a little bit off, and also like like something like The Sopranos. There's an expression, of course, I this is all relatively new to me because I grew up north of all of this. I grew up in New England, where where I grew up, the state of Maine has its own like sort of connection to Boston. But I think kind of going back to that New York City, New Jersey connection, there's an expression in New York City called the bridge tunnel crowd, and that is the people from New Jersey who flood into the city, to go to restaurants and stuff like that. And there's a derisive sense to that. But also for the people that grew up in that North Jersey area, they also would sort of feel this sense of like almost like not inferiority, but they would know that people look down on them in New York City. And like my wife and I watch The Real Housewives of New Jersey. She's a big fan of it, and she kind of got me into it. And the show always is showing the bridges that connect New Jersey with New York to give you this sense of like, yeah, you're not there. You're not in the city of New York. You're in New Jersey. Essentially kind of similar to this. Like, you're not in London. You're in Essex. Even distance wise, it's very close. I think London and Essex maybe like an hour apart. Or I guess it depends on where
depends.
London.
Essex is big, so it depends
Yeah.
what part of Essex you want to get out to. So getting out to Southend, where quite a bit of this, well, where this film is essentially sort of taking place, would actually be I don't know exactly, but at least a couple of hours to get out to Southend.
Okay. Yeah, so it's almost like, because to give you a sense of how close New Jersey is, I guess it depends too, like where people are in New Jersey. Like, so like Newark would almost be like if New York ever really expanded to have the kind of boroughs that Greater London has, because New York only has the 5 boroughs, so it's just sort of more. But then it's like its reach as a metro area expands to a similar area that Greater London is. And so if it ever expanded like that, it would probably encapsulate some of those North Jersey locations. But then like the ones where like shows like, Real Housewives take place, or like the Jersey Shore show, things like that, or Sopranos, they would exist probably a little bit outside of what a greater New York would be, but they'd be closer probably to they're closer to New York than Essex would be. Like it wouldn't be a 2-hour drive to get to New York.
Yeah.
You'd pop over the bridge. I mean, traffic would be a concern. But yeah, it's very different too. The other thing too, and I don't know too if because the way you're describing Essex does really fit New Jersey, whereas like you go north of New York City into Connecticut, that's considered a whole different kind of suburb, right? Those are, people that move to Connecticut are considered a different class of suburbanite, even though there are just as many rich people in New Jersey. But yeah, it's interesting because the way you're describing it does sound very much the way New Jersey is perceived. And of course, where I live near South Jersey, where there isn't that inferiority complex, because Philadelphia cannot engender that kind of inferiority complex. I mean, I guess trying to compare what Philadelphia is, it'd be like if you took London as a financial entity and London as a political entity, and you separated the two, and then you put something like a Manchester or Birmingham right smack in the middle of the two. That's what Philadelphia is. So it has almost like a small town feel for being a big city. And there is almost a sense too for them. I think if it wasn't its own big city, they would have the inferiority complex as well. That like, yeah, but that sense of like my wife talks about it too when she was growing up, that certain parts of Philadelphia, people would be like, 5 or 6 years behind on fashion trends, things like that. It kind of sounds like that's kind of what you're describing there, that like,
I don't think it's that they're behind on fashion trends. I mean, I was thinking about it. I mean, I think the associations that you'd make when you sort of like think about Essex is that it's like it's gaudy, it's cheap, it's brash, it's tacky, and it's sort of, it's not like, I mean, actually, I would say they're not like behind in the fashions. They actually covet fashions, but it's going to be, they're going to be doing it in a kind of in a sort of more sort of like what other people in parts of the country would consider like a brash or a tacky way. So there is this idea of sort of I think you'd sort of pigeonhole it as like being unsophisticated, but it's not like behind, and it's not because there isn't like money or wealth there. It's just sort of more it's more brasher, more less sophisticated. I think that would be the kind of the illusions that I think probably to sort of draw from sort of the kind of locale of Essex.
Yeah, that makes sense because with the New Jersey aspect of it, right? You'd wear the designers, but you'd make sure that the designer name is across the top, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. It's like Louis Vuitton. I try to say it right but the French way. In America they call it Louis Vuitton, but it's instead of Vuitton. But anyway, so like that is a brand that it's funny whenever I watch older movies, like James Bond's A View to a Kill, or something like that, where rich sort of upper class people have the a whole suitcase set of Louis Vuitton. Whereas in America, it's like every time you go somewhere, there's there's a housewife that has a handbag that's like a Louis Vuitton handbag or something like that. It's kind of that same idea, or Burberry, right? I think that was kind of a big thing. I think in England, right?
Yeah.
That people would Burberry baseball caps and all of that kind of thing. It's kind of a similar thing here in America with some of those designers.
Yeah, exactly. Where they get adopted by like a group of people that Burberry would be like, oh no, why we don't want these are not the people we want buying our caps. It's gone wrong. Our brand is now being like damaged by being bought by people that we don't want to be buying it. So yeah, it's quite I shed no tears for these expensive brands when they find themselves in these sort of dilemmas. They shouldn't be so up on themselves that they're kind of they're kind of suddenly complaining they got the wrong sort of customers. Well, if you're going to charge those sort of outlandish prices for a bloody baseball cap, well, don't just you can't have it. You can't have it everywhere. You can't charge that much money and then like decide who gets to buy the bloody thing or not.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's funny when I was younger, like in my early 20s, I remember getting like a Prada, like skull cap kind of thing. So you had like the little Prada band on it, and I thought it was so cool that I had that, and all of that stuff. And of course now, like living in Philadelphia, again talking about like sort of the crime thing, it's like I wouldn't want to wear anything that would like point to me having any kind of money, because I even if I bought it used on eBay or something like that, I still would not. It's like no, I've got my cheap Phillies hat and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's probably another side of it. But there is that sense of like, yeah, you got to have the brands and the logos and all of that. And I think the other thing too, and I don't know to what extent this would happen in Essex, but here in the U.S. too, I think the other thing is that people go into debt. I know like with that Real Housewives of New Jersey show, they've essentially locked in the entire cast because they're in so much debt that they have to keep doing the show. They can't stop doing it. And so they're so leveraged that they have to do every season if they can. It's amazing how it works. And so like they don't want to be on the show anymore because it's invasive. It's a reality show that's filming them in their lives, and it doesn't really always depict them in the best light, but they're stuck with it. There was one woman who was kind of more in that New York realm of being rich, who isn't on the show. She's kind of like they call her their friend of, because she had an eating disorder. I think that made it difficult for her to be on the show with all the stress and everything. But there was this sense of tension with the more traditional New Jerseyites on the show that kind of felt inferior to her, and then they would lash out at her. And of course, like she had a beach house in the Hamptons, so they all had their beach houses on what we call the Jersey Shore here in New Jersey. But she had hers in the Hamptons, which is the Hamptons is like, again, it's upper class money in a different way that the Jersey Shore isn't. And they all kind of felt it. They were all like, oh, we're in the Hamptons with, like, oh, we should get a place in the Hamptons. We need to buy a place in the Hamptons, all that kind of stuff. Like suddenly they just kind of realized like they were trying to glom onto it, which I guess is probably a similar thing to like what you're talking about with the Essex people, where they would get a sense of like, what is something that we're not doing that people that are rich in London are doing? Maybe we need to co-opt it or do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although I was intrigued by these people in these reality shows who are sort of like, so in debt they're locked into making the program. I just hope none of them take the Craig Fairbrass approach to getting out from under.
No, it would be amazing. I mean, it really is. Like,
although I would watch it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, there's this one woman on the show who's like kind of this more popular one. Her name's Teresa, and so she's been on this show since the beginning in 2009. And it was one of those things where like they brought her brother and sister-in-law and cousin onto the cast without telling her, and they didn't get along. So it just created all this drama. But the thing was, her husband went away for jail for tax evasion. He essentially was filing what we call a W-2 form. I imagine there's a similar form in England where if you're working as an employee, right, you have to fill out this W-2 form so that the government takes tax from your paycheck every month. And he was filling out fake ones to get mortgages to buy houses that he could flip, because he needed to keep making money to be on the show for her so she could be, gaudy and all of that. And then when he got busted, of course, they suddenly had to pay restitution. They had no way to make money. So she was like forced to be on the show. She even went to jail for it because she had signed some of those things. And she's stuck with the show. She's been on it for how many years, and she can't go off it because she needs that money.
Well, I mean, What a strange fate to find yourself trapped in a reality TV program.
Exactly. Yes, and right, and then the brother and
You could
sister.
almost make a reality TV program about being trapped in a reality TV program because I think it's a spin-off. Maybe she could do that, and then that'd help get her the money to get out of these awful contracts.
I think she would want to do the spinoff. So like there was another person on the cast who did have their own spinoff that didn't last because it wasn't any good. I think that's what she would want. Is she would want the spinoff, but she has no leverage. But by the same token, they need her because she's like the most famous one on the show. She's one everybody knows. So they need to keep her on the cast as well. So it's just like this tension that's constantly there when they're filming and all of this kind of stuff. It's a fascinating thing. But I mean, like the last season of my wife and I were kind of just like we've been watching because we've been invested for so long. We're kind of like, do we want to keep watching this? Because it just seems like it's like nobody gets along and nobody really wants to be there, but they have no choice. Yeah, it is a fascinating thing. I mean, like there was a woman that they added to the cast like 5 years ago. She got sued by this other clothing company, Vineyard Vines, because she did her clothing company. So she got stuck with the show. I mean, I don't know. It almost seems like you could make a Lifetime movie out of it, right? It's like it sounds like what Craig Fairbrass thought was the scam being used on his brother, right? That like it's like they get you on the show and then you get hit with a lawsuit or something, and suddenly you need to stay on. And so yeah, it's a very fascinating. I mean, there's another woman who her family was so leveraged to renovate the house because they needed a storyline. So she thought the storyline would be renovating the house. And her ex-husband, who was a lawyer, he was siphoning money away from his clients to pay for these renovations, and he got busted doing it and was disbarred because and again, so now he's he needs to be on the show as well. They need to get the paycheck from being on the show. So yeah, it's very interesting.
You've opened my eyes to the seedy underbelly of American reality TV programs.
Yes, reality TV it's like I don't know, and I imagine it's probably similar in England where it's like you've essentially got a relatively cheap labor force. Like, yes, you've got to pay them a certain amount of money that's requisite to what the show is doing, but you don't have to pay writers. You don't have to pay all of the stuff that comes with a TV show, right? A reality show, you can cut those costs, and they're goldmine. I mean, that's HBO Max. They've been bought out by the Discovery Channel, which used to be science-based and suddenly turned into just reality shows about, people on 90-day fiance visas and, fundamentalist Christian families that had 19 kids and stuff like that. And that they made so much money off that they bought HBO, and everybody's worried now about what's going to happen to HBO. Like all the programming, like we're talking about with The Sopranos and stuff like that, is all going to go away and just be replaced with bad reality shows. So,
yeah, and with the Hollywood writers' strike as well, like reality shows is going to be all that's left.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And I mean, I guess I kind of got us way off track there talking. I think once you started bringing up the Essex thing, and I was like, oh, this is like New Jersey, and I was like, oh, this is kind of it kind of got me off track. But it is an interesting thing too with shows. I guess like because England wouldn't be considered part of the writers' strike, right? Like they have their own writers' guild that negotiates their own contracts, I think.
I don't know. Yeah. I really don't. I don't think. I think it would be a different guild. So I don't think it's. I don't think the UK is affected by it. I think that's one of the things I've heard, because that's why sort of Netflix, I think, are a bit more relaxed about actually bringing this to an end, is because with their given their sort of international scope, they'll still have every other country around the world still be able to kind of like produce TV series, so they'll still have new content that they can push out via Netflix. So it's not gonna it's not hitting us in the UK, because we got our own actors unions, and I don't know what there must be. I'm assuming there's a writers UK version of Equity, which is the actors union in the UK. So we're still going to get our shows, Matt. It sounds like you're going to be watching a lot more British TV in the near future.
I was going to say, like, maybe that'll be the thing that brings some of these properties to America and makes them people more likely to watch them. The one thing I'd read was that apparently like watching streaming, and also probably like watching some of this other movies and things like that have been made in England or other parts of the world. I read that actually isn't like a strike breaking element, because what it does is it actually hurts the the networks more because you're not watching any live programming. So if you're watching reruns, it's not like I was thinking like because everybody's like, oh well, what's the big deal? I'm just gonna binge these shows on Netflix or something like that. But actually, what I've heard that actually helps the writer's cause because there's nothing new being created and nobody's going to watch any programming that's new. And it's the new programming a lot of times that sells these streaming networks and things like that.
Well, I'm glad I can continue to binge watch TV shows and be ethically sort of sound at the same time.
Exactly right. You don't have to feel like you're a strike breaker. So yes, exactly. So it's the reality shows you have to look out for. Though I do think I don't know how Housewives of New Jersey, Real Housewives would translate into kind of the same way we were talking about some of these shows. How would they translate in America? I mean, Real Housewives of New Jersey. I don't even know how it translates to the rest of the United States, to be honest. I don't, I don't even know how well I would get it if I hadn't moved down here to within 100 or maybe 160 kilometers away, something like that from New York City or from that area where all that's happening. My wife gets it much more because she grew up in a little, again, in it and understands it better. But I honestly don't know how that kind of would play. I don't know what people would do in London with Real Housewives of New Jersey with these characters. I don't. It would probably be. I don't think it would be quite the same as me sort of puzzling out, what Essex means compared to London. Because there's a little bit more that I can glom onto, like Craig Fairbrass. I don't think these reality show characters would fit the bill enough.
I don't think we'd be fazed by them. I think we'd just sort of, oh yeah, this is Americans for you, Right. So I think we just roll with it. We just assume this is sort of kind of normal.
Now, on a completely different note, when you were going back to that, where you're talking about the fact that the violent engagements didn't involve guns, but they involved things like baseball bats, crowbars, and things like that. One thing I wanted to ask you is, every time I've seen a baseball bat in a British production, it's used as a weapon, right, on somebody else. I mean, do people actually play baseball in England? Is it sold in a sporting goods store, or is it sold it's sort of like with knives and swords and things like that?
You know what? I think that I would imagine any sports shop that basically I would if I was in the police, I would be issuing instructions, say anyone buying, I want to know any report of anybody buying a baseball bat, because they're only buying it for either self-defense or to commit an aggressive act, because nobody. I mean, there are a few people that play baseball in the UK, but not that many. And I mean, there's a bit of softball in the UK, but that's played with most use a metal bat for that. So it's not a big sport here. And as I say, I would be suspicious of anybody buying a baseball bat in the UK.
Right, because I mean that's the one thing about the cricket bat, right? Is that it doesn't because it has a larger surface area.
It's a bit unwieldy, yeah.
Yeah,
it's not right. That's why you want a baseball bat.
Right, exactly. And I think both of our films featured baseball bats. I mean, obviously, Rise of the Foot Soldier, they were using them, but I think also in Villain, I think there was a baseball bat behind the counter there. I don't remember.
Is there might? I mean, he uses when he attacks those two guys for the money, the 800 quid. I think he's using a hammer there.
He's using a hammer there.
Yeah. I don't remember a baseball bat, but generally, it's a weapon. It's not a sporting item in the UK.
Right.
So if you're over here and you're thinking, there's some, that guy must be on his way to a game. He's not. He's on his way to kneecap someone.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I was wondering too, like maybe it comes with like bar supply stores, right? Like so you get like your towels and everything to wipe things down, in a baseball bat that you could store underneath the counter there. So so it's like it's all part of it's part of the expenses when you're starting a new bar. I don't know if because I remember they used to have the Gordon Ramsay show, the kitchen Nightmares, where he like he's like renovating the bar and he's like, hey, you don't have a baseball bat here, what are you doing?
What's that bar rescue show? I've never seen them mention. Like when they're making over the bar, they never sort of. And look, we got you a couple of complimentary baseball bats in case somebody starts getting out of line.
Right, exactly. But now that I thought of that because I was like, I have never seen any. When I was in England, it's funny. I bought a rugby ball. there was like the Welsh team. I had a ball, and I remember people were wondering why I would even buy a Wales, but I didn't know. It's like, oh, it said Wales, on the rugby ball, and my friends and I were in the streets throwing it overhand, and people were just like, that's, what are you doing? Like, that doesn't make it.
So I'm surprised you weren't arrested.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Yes. I remember. I think we were in Yorkshire for that. So the one funny trip was we went to Hull. We stopped off in Hull, and we were traveling with a group, actually talking about New Jersey, a group from like rural New Jersey who were even greener than we were in the city. Like one of the people in our group had lived in New York for a while, or grew up kind of near New York, so he was a little bit more savvy in a city. But I remember we were in Hull, and my friend and I, we were getting beers, and I guess some people from that New Jersey group yelled at some guys in a RAV4. I don't know what they were doing. That they got chased by the. So there was an edict when we got back to the hotel of nobody is leaving the hotel while we're in Hull. Everybody stays in the hotel.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like a bullet was dodged there.
Yes.
Or a baseball bat beating was dodged there.
Right, exactly. That might have been it. We might have seen the baseball bat, like, hey, look at that. There we go. Like,
it slowly arcs towards your head.
Right, exactly. Well, see, that was the one thing, is we were good. We didn't pick fights with anybody. So we kind of kept a low profile, when we went out and everything. We were just excited to be able to go to bars. Again, it's like that idea that, if you're 18, you can go to a bar. We just thought that was the greatest thing ever. So and they actually changed the rule in our high school with that, at the time it was, if you were old enough to drink in the country, you could. But my friend and I, when we were there, we just completely blew that out of the water, because we were just going out to bars every night. And they decided that was done. And so actually, my brother ended up getting busted on a trip to Greece because he was drinking, and he was 18 at the time as well. And so I guess roundabout way got my poor brother in trouble for drinking on a school trip. But yeah, so we did well. We were not the ones getting into messes with people in Hull. But again, growing up where I did, there were no Hulls. There was now, of course, being here in Philly, I see plenty of Hulls, and even much worse than Hull that I drive through. So I'm a little bit more equipped for it.
Well, I'm glad you managed to visit I'm glad you managed to get back to the United States unscathed.
Yes, the only thing was that my luggage got left in school. So we went all the way up to Scotland. We went to Edinburgh, so where we ended the trip. And the entire trip, I had been putting my luggage in the lobby the whole time, and thinking that the bus drivers were taking it to the bus from the lobby. I didn't realize we were supposed to be bringing it all the way to the bus. And when we got to the airport in Glasgow, my luggage wasn't on the bus, and discovered that it was sitting in the lobby where I had left it. The last one, somehow it had made it all the rest of the trip, but Glasgow, Edinburgh is where it got left, and we were too late, between Glasgow and Edinburgh to go get it. So when I got home, I thought about calling them to have it shipped back, and I was just like, it's just closed. I'll just, So there are people that are probably wearing my NHL hockey jerseys and things like that, and at that time. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm familiar with the lack of service culture here in the UK. I mean, nobody's going to put it on the bus for you, Matt.
No, I don't know who was getting it there. I think it was somebody from the trip, and
somebody very charitable, clearly.
Yes, somebody was taking care of it, and they just didn't to that point. And I who knows what happened, but
by the time they got to Glasgow, they just, you know what, I've had enough of this guy leaving his.
Exactly.
He's going to do himself for once.
Exactly. Yes. And it was one of the things I was like, oh, and the other funny thing was that my friend had left his passport in the hotel room, and we had to go back to the hotel. And I probably passed my luggage in the lobby and didn't see it when we went back up to find his passport. So there's that other piece of it too. Talking about inevitability, right? And sort of what we were kind of going full circle with our two films here, right? The inevitability of me, kind of drinking too much on my trip to England, and it's just I had to pass my luggage and watch it, miss it there in the lobby a second time.
There's always a price to be paid.
Exactly. Yes. Well, Will, as we're wrapping up, anything else on Rise of the Foot Soldier that we didn't mention?
Well, there is an interesting connection between this film and one of the films that we talked about the last time I was on. So the director of Rise of the Foot Soldier 3 is Zachary Adler, who directed The Courier with Olga Kurylenko that we talked about. So yeah, that was that's one of the reasons why I was quite stoked ahead of The Courier coming out, was because I really enjoyed this film, and I thought, oh, you know, Olga Kurylenko action movie. The guy did that film that I really liked. Should be a good combination, but should be a good combination. Sadly, yeah, the Courier didn't quite cut the mustard. But yeah, interesting little connection between the films that we've been speaking about.
Yeah, interesting to looking at his CV, because he also did two Cray movies, two movies about the Crays in the mid 2010s. But also, he hasn't made anything since The Courier, so he may have looked at The Courier and decided to hang it up as well. I hope that didn't end it for him. I hope there's another. He's got I
think it's producers who looked at The Courier and have hung it up for. I don't think might not be all his. I don't think it's necessarily his choice.
Right. No, you might be right. Yeah, we we'll call you. How does that? That's right. Yeah, that's good. Well, excellent. Well, yeah. I don't know if you wanted to plug anything. One thing I wanted to mention too was that one of my previous podcasts, I think I was talking about going on your show and comeuppance, like kind of when I was coming out of hiatus in late 2019, and I was thinking that your show was relatively new in 2019, but your podcast has been around since the mid 2010s, like 2015.
Yes, that's right. I mean, be going longer than longer than makes any sense, Matt.
Well, the thing is, there's always going. I think there's never going to be a shortage of films that have exploding helicopters in them, and I think I think it's one of those things where you're right. It's sort of like I don't know. I think the show is always entertaining. I guess there's that point. I guess if you get to a point where you feel like it's not entertaining, maybe that's when you wrap it up. But I think the most recent one you did with Doug Tilley, I had a lot of fun listening to that one.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast that put out, but I think I'm doomed to continue documenting the strange ways that helicopters keep exploding in films until I have sort of like a big media moment. I want somebody to do a big feature piece on me. The mad guy who's been sort of counting films with exploding helicopters for 15 years. I want my moment in the sun before I can finally get out of the game.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember, Doug was talking about like how he takes on these projects when he was on that recent episode, and how he doesn't want to get to that, like he feels like getting to the end would be like a bad thing. So like, for example, Eric Roberts, right? Like they just keep trying to do Eric Roberts when he's just got so many movies. It is funny because you were, I don't think you did. I don't know if you were thinking it at the time, but I don't think you mentioned on the podcast that you're like, yeah, I've taken on a project that I don't know will ever end, right? Like that there will always be new movies coming out with exploding helicopters in them.
Well, I thought that I would actually get on top of it initially. I thought, I should be able to break the back of this like in a few years and get on top of it. But what I've come to realize is that this is actually a Sisyphean task to which there is no end. And sometimes what, Matt, I just try not to think about it too much, because it would be too. I mean, I guess you've got to dedicate yourself. I guess you've got to dedicate your life to something. It probably would have been more useful to everyone if I was attempting to cure cancer, but unfortunately, I've chosen documenting exploding helicopters in film. So, I'm stuck with it. My listeners are stuck with it. Anyone who looks at my blog is stuck with it. So yeah, we'll see what cracks first. The desire of filmmakers to do films with exploding helicopters, or my interest and commitment to documenting it.
Yes. Well, I think for people out there, I mean, one, you have the Letterboxd list, which I think I'm still shy of 200. I've got to get
that's an appalling number, Matt.
I know.
An appalling number.
I know. I got to cross that 200 threshold. I've got to seek out more exploding helicopter films. I think the last film that I saw that had an exploding helicopter was Fast X, I believe.
I mean,
Executive Target.
Yes, that's got 2 in, I believe. But
Yes,
what you've done over like you're 1,000 reviews on DTV,
1,200.
1,200, and you've
Yeah.
only watched 200 films with an exploding helicopter. That just can't be. Well, you must be. You're just picking the worst films possible. I mean,
Well,
I don't understand those numbers.
yeah, it's amazing because I think one of them is I've only done 30 p.m. entertainment films, I think. Or no, I've done 40 now. I think I've done 40 p.m. entertainment films now. And so that's part of it, right? I probably got like another maybe 40 or so to go. I don't know quite how many I've got left of those, but that's one piece of it. That PM Entertainment Films, they were good for one exploding helicopter per movie at least. I think that was their average. I mean, when you were on
Yep.
previous time we did Ring of Fire 3. I mean, they got it out of the way in the first 10 minutes. It's like sort of check that box right away. So that's one piece of it there. But yeah, it's funny because I was looking when I look over your list, there are a lot of direct-to-video movies on there, but there's also a lot of blockbusters that we wouldn't probably cover on the site. But I think that's one of the things that kind of keeps the train running. Every time a new I mean, I don't know how many Marvel movies have exploding helicopters or like Fast and I guess Fast and Furious took a little time. I think it was like the 7th film before
That's
they finally
right. Yeah.
But now they're making up for lost time because now they've got to always blow one up, I think, in one of their movies. But yeah, that's part of it too. I think that I never quite realized.
So yeah, the Marvel movies. Yeah, there's quite a few in there, but they're a bit adverse to explaining a helicopter, which I find a bit puzzling. Which I would expect more of their films to have an exploding helicopter in. It's an odd one.
Yeah, I was trying to think of other ones when I go through the list. I mean, the other thing too is I think you have some films from like the 70s that technically wouldn't be direct to video that are in there as well, or giallo films, things like that. Sometimes it's just Antonio Margheriti, which I that's probably an area that I need to get more into. Is like some of those 80s like Philippine actioners, the when the Vietnam War, right, films that are shot in the Philippines. Those have a lot of exploding helicopters.
They certainly do, and the actor who's been in the most films with an exploding helicopter is a guy called Mike Monty, who made pretty much nothing but those Filipino sort of Vietnam or kind of jungle set action movies.
Yeah, there's something about seeing Mike Monty in one of those movies where it's like, you watch it and it takes place in an area that makes no sense, right? Because it's supposed to be Vietnam, but it's the Philippines, and it's just sort of some like out of the way like jungle location in a lot of cases. Sometimes the actors are recognizable, but a lot of times there are a bunch of Italian actors and actresses who we've never met before, never seen before. And so it's like almost like I have to anchor myself with Mike Monty. I use him as my anchor when I'm watching him and is it Jim Gaines or
Yes, Jim Gaines, yeah.
Yeah, he's the other. Yeah, like if I see them, but I have such a long ways to go with this. Like Cirio H. Santiago, he's in my Hall of Fame, but only has like 10 director credits, I think, or maybe 12 to 13. I don't know. He doesn't have a lot, but he's someone that as I get more into his films too, I think I'll see a lot more exploding helicopters.
You certainly will. No director has exploded more films. No director has exploded more helicopters in films than Cirio H. Santiago. So if you watch more of his movies, you're bound to come across an exploding helicopter.
Yeah, so that probably gets to the root of why I'm so woefully under the number that I should be for exploding helicopter movies. I mean, you would think. I mean, I think we've done over 800 action movies because I do tag the genre when I do the film, and I think of the 1,200, over 800 are action movies. So it is crazy to think that and again, in terms of how many we reviewed on the site, it's even less, right? Because a lot of those ones that are exploding helicopter movies that I've seen are big budget films that, aren't going to make it onto the site. So that's the other piece of it. It's like, there's probably like maybe 150 exploding helicopter movies that I've done on the site. So it's even less there.
I'm shaking my head, Matt. I'm shaking my head.
It is kind of amazing because you'd think there'd be a lot of overlap.
I feel like you're letting me down here.
Right? No. Well, it's funny. I think when I went to your list, and people should go on Letterboxd and find your exploding helicopter list and kind of see where you rank on there. Kind of see how many you have. Because I was like, oh, I've got probably tons on here, and then I'm going through and looking at, because most of them are movies, that have already been checked off, right? That I've checked off as having seen somewhere else. But I was kind of, going through to catch up with some of the ones I'd missed. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a bunch on here. And it's like, Yeah, no, like I think 190 is where I'm sitting right now. So yeah, I've got some work to do for sure.
Got to get those rookie. Those are rookie numbers, Matt. Those are rookie numbers.
Exactly. Yeah, somebody who's been doing this for a while. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's funny because I mean, Dolph Lundgren, right? I've done as many Dolph Lundgren movies. He's kind of. I'm trying to think how far up the list is he on.
He's joint second with Samuel L. Jackson. He's been in
Okay.
11 films.
Yeah. So that makes sense, right? That Dolph, I've done that many films. I think Mike Monty, I think I've done like 10 of his movies, but maybe not quite that many. And obviously Samuel L. Jackson, I almost never do his movies. I think he was in Arena that I reviewed for the site, but most of the time, right, he's in big budget productions, so I almost never see him. So that's part of it too. And then Don the Dragon Wilson, right? We discovered that he has fewer exploding helicopter movies, but I've seen those ones that were removed from his bio. So like I think what was it, Siege of Fire Base Gloria, right? That was one that was removed from his bio, and Strategic Commando, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, there's another sort of like jungle slog
Yeah.
movie that we need like we need people to really sit down. Like, I mean, he's on the convention circuit, isn't he? Don the Dragon Will. So we need somebody to like sit him down and like let's get the official filmography of Don sorted out, because it's it's impacting the tagging on your site. It's impacting my statistics on films on actors with exploding helicopters. I mean, in this day and age, there shouldn't be this much ambiguity about what the films that he has or hasn't made.
Yeah, I wonder if that's what
I can't
happened.
keep up this continual IMDb editing.
Right. I know. I wonder if he looked at if he or like somebody looked at his IMDb page and he was like, I wasn't in any of these movies. Like they take these down. I never did these movies. I was doing kickboxing at the time or something. But the funny thing is, like, he did do, I think it's called New York Chinatown. That was like his first film. He was in that. Like I reviewed that one for the site. I found it on YouTube and reviewed it. And he was in that. So like all the ones that kind of come in that were removed are in between that one and like the first Blood Fist movie. So he was making movies at that time. So it's not completely inconceivable that he would have been in those.
We need some, where's the Actors Guild on sorting this out?
No, I know it is funny that like that's kind of the best thing we've got is this IMDb thing, which like is like crowdsourced and people just I mean the trivia sections on some of the like if you go to a Seagal movie and you look at the trivia sections, people write the funniest things, but they're so I mean I think somebody wrote on the first Fast and Furious movie that the director originally wanted to have Mark Paul Gosselaar and AC Slater and Screech as the cast. Like that's like if you see that's in the trivia for that. And I wonder how many people saw that and they were like, I think I was like, there was like a 1% chance, and I wanted to hang on to that 1% chance that it was true, that was really what they wanted to do. But you just never know what you're going to see in those things. And then it's like, okay, how much do I believe when it's something that's not as ludicrous? Like, do I believe that, like, okay, that's the side of the story between, the conflict between Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson, or, those things. Like, we never know how much we can believe that stuff.
IMDb trivia is notoriously unreliable, but Matt, I want to believe. I want to believe there's a divergent timeline with Zach, AC Slater, and Screech, who are now all kind of in the Fast and Furious films, probably all now not speaking to each other because obviously that's the dynamic that obviously has to exist between all the major actors. They're just
I mean, can you imagine? Yeah, I mean, Mario Lopez doing the Toretto, being the Toretto guy talking about family.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Zach is the he's Paul Walker all written all over it. He'd be in that role. And Screech is the kind of sort of like Tyrese type sort of comedy sidekick type thing.
Well, the trivia thing said he was the guy that was like the engine expert in the first one. But you're right. Like they've turned Tyrese into Screech in these films, right? Like they just made him this comic relief thing that he's really like if you watch the second movie, there's a good balance of like serious character and comic relief. And he has a lot of great chemistry with Paul Walker. And then they just sort of just turn him into this thing where he's just the comic relief all the time. And I don't even know like how I remember it was in the seventh film where he has the microphone during a birthday party, and I thought he was actually going to sing because he actually can sing. He's a good singer. I had his first CD when I was in college, and my friends, when they had dates in their dorm rooms, they would borrow that CD from me to sort of set the mood. So he was a really good singer, and I was like, oh, he's gonna sing. It's gonna be like this whole ironic moment where like everybody thinks he's a goofball and he's gonna sing. Nope, they didn't do it. They didn't even go for it. So I don't know. He seems to be leaning into it, I guess. But yeah, it's kind of too bad.
Yeah, I think you could get get Tiffany Amber Thiessen in there as
Yes.
I've forgotten the name of the actress.
Would she be
but,
Mia? Maybe, right? Would she? Be,
Yeah.
yeah, Slater's sister. Yeah. Yeah, it would have been perfect, and of course it would have worked out too because Zach and Kelly, right? They had the relationship in real life, not in real life, on the show on Saved by the Bell. They'd have it in the movies as well. Yeah, yeah. It's a shame because I can you imagine if it had turned into the franchise that it is with them and the movies. I just can only imagine like if they, I mean, one of the things is this, the Screech character is no longer in the films after the first movie, so he gets killed off. So, but the rest of them, I mean, just imagining Mark Paul Gosselaar like on that scene where he's like in the bus in the seventh movie and it's like falling off the ledge and he's like running. It works with Paul Walker. I can only imagine it doing it with Mark Paul Gosselaar.
Well, I'd love to believe there's a divergent timeline where all these films are being played out.
Yes, I feel bad because I feel like I stepped on your plugs there when we were talking about your podcast being around. But yeah, maybe I'll let you reset the plugs there so people know where to find you.
Okay, I will reset my plug. So yeah, if you are interested in finding out some more if you're interested in reliable trivia about films, then go and check out my website explodinghelicopter.com, where I've got reviews and information about films, actors, directors, anything to do with helicopter explosions in film. You can find me on Twitter at Chopper Fireball. We're on Instagram as well under the name Exploding Helicopter, on Facebook. But yeah, if you're interested, come check us out. Well, yeah, and don't forget the podcast as well. Matt's been on a few times. Go and check out the Soldier Boys episode. That was a very good episode that we did on that film.
Yeah, I think people should be subscribed to your podcast and check those out because they're always fun episodes. The Soldier Boys one, that one had more to it than I think we were expecting, and it was definitely a lot of fun. And also, I wanted to plug your Twitter again because your Twitter is a lot of fun. It's always kind of fun when I whatever's going on with Twitter, with Musk and all of that, something happened initially where my algorithm was thrown off and I wasn't seeing your posts or a few others that I follow, like Mitch from Video Vacuum. I just wasn't seeing the posts. I don't know what happened, but now it's been righted, maybe because I went on a liking spree of your stuff at some point. But I'm seeing now. But you have great like short video clips and GIFs of different exploding helicopters in movies that are a lot of fun. I always get a kick out of them.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy them. So yeah, if that sounds like fun, then yeah, give me a follow, say hi.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I think maybe this is a good place for us to wrap it up. So thank you again, Will, for coming on. This was a really fun episode. I think there was a lot we covered here, but it was a great time and really great to get into Craig Fairbrass.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about these two films and plug the work of Craig Fairbrass. Yeah, check these out. If you enjoy them, then yeah, his stuff that he's been putting out the last 5 or 6 years, really good. Definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, he's an actor we really should be checking out here in America. He needs a bigger following here for sure. So hopefully we'll start the trend here, kind of, where we'll be the leaders of the charge.
The leader of the Fairbrassants.
That's right, the Fairbrassants, exactly, for sure. Well, thank you again, Will, for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. And we'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.